Thank you, Matan. Namaskar, very good morning. Shri Bhupinder Singh Bhallaji, Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. Mr. Suman Sinha, Chairperson, Global Wind Energy Council, India Chair. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, the entire global offshore fraternity as we speak is witnessing this side event on the eve of or on the sidelines of the G20 meeting that we are having. This is the third in the series of the various deliberations and discussions that we are doing with all the G20 member countries under the India's G20 presidency. And it is on that sidelines, the importance of offshore, the importance of energy transition, and especially the offshore, the efforts that the global community is doing to ensure that the offshore wind becomes a mainstream resource for us to now accelerate the energy transition in our quest for the global net zero. And thus it becomes very important when India is striving, when India is taking the leadership in terms of further accelerating the pace at which we are moving towards our 2030 agenda. And obviously the net zero goal that our Honorable Prime Minister has set. And in this context, today's deliberations and the gathering here and discussing on the way forward will be very, very critical for us. As it's an honor to be here presenting you and talking to you, and obviously with the directions and the guidance of Secretary MNRE, we are taking this path forward. We all know that this last year, which is 2022, was phenomenal in terms of the growth that offshore wind took. It was, I think, around 9 gigawatts of offshore capacity was added, and we do believe that from 2025, this annual capacity additions is going to be more than 25 gigawatt across the globe. What we have seen is obviously this developments, and I will limit my discussions to today when we are deliberating this, the India story forward. You all know that while we have done phenomenally good, and I do always mention that it is wind that has actually silently led the India's energy revolution, the India's transition journey, because we began somewhere in 1990s. And over the last 3 to 4 decades, the wind sector, the wind technology and the wind regime and the regulatory support that India's wind sector has got was phenomenal. With almost closing 43 gigawatts now, we are 4th highest in the world. And that has brought really the India's RE map on the global, as a global map, I can say. Where we had begun in 2015, some may say we are late, but what I believe is that the right opportunity has now come. And over the last 1 or maybe 12 to 18 months, we have been deliberating on what is the way forward. And with a lot of intent and content coming from you, from the stakeholders, we have now devised our plans. We have been, through the last June, as you remember, we have been working on the strategy paper. So there are various business models that have been presented to you. The draft tenders have been discussed with you. Internally, we have been moving with certain couple of advancements on the support that is needed, not only from the levelized cost of energy bridging gap that is required, but also on the ports, the infrastructure, the evacuation, the capacity building, the financial aspects. So over the 2 sessions today, we will be discussing with you amongst that, and I'm sure with certain inputs that will come today, we will be able to take our journey forward. As far as India's energy, the offshore sector is concerned, we have been deliberating within our ministries. Ministry of Power has been an active participant in our discussions. We have the National Institute of Wind Energy, which is our backbone towards creating the infrastructure needed for not only securing approvals and permits, but also being a resourceful on the resource as well, on the energy measurements, on the offshore wind measurements, on the MSPs, and with several international partnerships that we have had in terms of whether it's Denmark, UK, and many other countries have been actively participating and bringing their journey to our attention, that with their experiences and learnings, how can we now move forward and learn from their experiences over the last 2 decades that they have been doing. Today's discourse, I'm sure will benefit our progress, our plans for the offshore wind, and will feed our inputs and will act as inputs to our process, the business models. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of the presentations today will deliberate on that, and we will take that forward. So with this, I would like for your interesting participation. I will not, while during the discussions, we'll dwell further on what are India's achievements, what are India's plans, and how this offshore is going to be a critical element for our energy transition forward. So I welcome you all on this session. Next 3 hours will be very interesting for all of us, so please keep your active participation in this. And I would like to also thank all the colleagues who have been working very hard to get this session on board. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Joint Secretary, sir. Now, may I request Mr. Suman Sinha, Chairperson GWEC India, to kindly deliver his opening remarks? Sir, please.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Mr. Bhalla, Mr. Jagdale, and all my friends here. I stand before you as Chairperson of GWEC India today, but as all of you know, I also am the CEO of ReNew, which has been actually quite deeply involved with the whole evolution of the wind sector in India, which, as Mr. Jagdale rightly remarked, has actually been one of the silent success stories of our renewable energy industry. And I know he himself comes from the wind route, so we're all sort of coming from the same original area of wind and then getting into renewable energy in the country. Now, offshore wind, of course, is very important, and I'll tell you why it's important. It's important because, as all of you know, just looking at the overall grid situation in the country and looking at the overall issue of the fact that we have to add 50 gigawatts of renewable energy every year, as MNRE has now come out with that trajectory, to get to the target of 500 gigawatts by 2030, that does require an awful lot of wind capacity to be added. We are just not going to get there if we keep doing more and more solar. We have to have a very significant amount of wind, which is also the reason why I presume that MNRE has kept at least a 10 gigawatt wind requirement every year to be added. And I think it's very important because it does give the more even power supply into the grid. And increasingly now, along with solar and batteries, and in some cases pumped hydro, is allowing us to now come out with these round-the-clock power solutions, which really in some ways is a real innovation of India. And I think this is something that we as a country have pioneered, and which is a very friendly product now for DISCOMs to absorb into their grid management. So I think wind is absolutely essential for that. But also looking at the whole issue of execution of wind in India, onshore wind that is, we know that there are limitations. There are certain capacity constraints in terms of sites, in terms of land availability, and so on. And so therefore, looking at it from that standpoint, offshore wind becomes a very, very important aspect of India's effort to reach the target of 500 gigawatts by 2030, and of course beyond that as well. And the sooner, therefore, we get started on developing offshore wind, I think the better it is for all of us, because the industry will take time to ramp itself up and so on. And therefore, leading into 2030 and beyond that, we need to make sure that offshore wind starts picking up in terms of installations. Now, we also all know, of course, that one of the big issues with offshore wind is the cost aspect. And we know that MNRE on its part has been trying to get offshore wind started in the country for several years. But the cost has always been an issue that has in some ways disincentivized the whole sector from taking off. Now, there are various things that we need to do coming together to make sure that the cost issue is addressed, because if that is not done, then unfortunately offshore wind will always be just a very high cost issue and will never really get the traction that it needs. Now, what are the things that we need to do to get the cost down? Because that, to my mind, is really fundamental in getting the whole industry moving forward. I think the first thing is we need collaboration. We need collaboration between the government and the private sector. Within the private sector, we need collaboration between Indian companies and overseas companies, because a lot of Indian companies don't have the expertise of offshore. Offshore companies don't have the expertise of India. And so therefore, we need to combine that together. We also need a lot of collaboration between IPPs like us and wind OEMs as well, because we need more customized wind turbines to be designed for the Indian environment. So we need to have collaboration between all of these different elements to really come together to essentially make sure that this industry is successful in the future. The second thing we need, which is very critical to bring costs down, is really a number of things have to be addressed there. Number one, we all know financing is a big contributor to cost. And so the question is, can we come up with some mechanisms to bring the financing cost down? Now, that's not something that is relevant only for offshore wind. Of course, it's relevant for the entire renewables area. But given that onshore renewables, both wind and solar, are now significantly cheaper than, let's say, fossil fuel-based power, it's less of a concern. In onshore wind, given the fact that the costs are likely to be higher, how we can get the cost down through financing mechanisms, whether it's through multilateral banks and so on, I think that's an important aspect. So whether the government can work with some of the multilaterals on getting specific lines put in place to encourage offshore wind in the country, I think could be an important aspect of cost reduction. The second thing, of course, is that we need long-term PPAs, because if we get long-term PPAs, that allows us to take long-term debt financing, and that allows us, therefore, also to bring the cost down. So in that availability of long-term PPAs, hopefully through the MNRE mechanism, is, I think, going to be an important aspect. The third and very important aspect of offshore wind is the issue of supply chain. And there are several aspects to it. Number one is that we need wind turbines that are specific to India and to Indian wind conditions. What we have today are mostly wind turbines that are designed for Class 1 and Class 2 sites. We need wind turbines that are designed for the wind speeds in offshore wind in Tamil Nadu and Gujarat and India, which are lower than what they are, let's say, in the North Sea or other parts of the world. So, and a lot of the wind OEMs really haven't focused on this aspect. And I think there's a lot of value sitting in having the turbines designed specifically from an Indian standpoint. And that can really allow us to bring costs down, rather than just pick up turbines that are being used elsewhere and then just do some retrofit and try to make them work for India. The second thing is we need ships. We need customized ships to be available for installing wind turbines offshore. Now, that is something that is actually a constraining factor globally. And when you look at the fact that offshore wind added 9 gigawatts, as Mr. Jagdale said, last year, and that number has to step up almost 3 or 4 times if we are to meet the global offshore wind targets as well, there is going to be a lack of availability of every single part of the value chain, of the supply chain. And given the fact that India is starting the offshore wind journey right now, unlike a lot of the Western world, which is already quite far advanced, getting that supply chain, getting those supply chain resources into the Indian context is, I think, something that we'll all have to work on collectively. So we need ships, we need cable. Cable is another big area of shortage now that is developing globally. And very importantly, we need people. We don't have trained people in India. So we'll actually have to import some of these folks from wherever that expertise exists. So I think some of these aspects of the supply chain really have to be addressed for us to be able to bring the cost down and really have optimized costs. The other thing is we need mass. We need mass to be measuring wind offshore so that we are able to better understand the wind scenario and are able to better design these offshore wind farms. And whether it's LiDAR or virtual mass or whatever, but we need more data, I think, and that is something that MNRE, of course, has been working on for some time. But I think just given the enormity of the availability of resource, we need to actually have much more of that. And lastly, I would say we need to have transmission infrastructure, because ultimately all of this offshore wind has to connect into substations onshore, and that power has to then be carried on. So I think there are a number of things that we have to work on collectively. The opportunity, of course, is tremendous, but so is the effort that is required for us to get the whole sector up and running. But I'm pretty confident that with the support of the government and their real enthusiasm and desire to get this sector off and running, I believe that this is really now the time when offshore wind in India is going to get started. And I think all of us, therefore, have an obligation to come together and, as I said, collaborate, solve all these problems that need to be solved, and make sure that by 2030, India has a thriving, robust offshore wind industry that can then continue to add a lot of capacity in the years after that. So I think that's really the task that all of us should sit and debate and try to find solutions for, not just now in this room, but also, of course, going forward from this point on. And I look forward to working with all of you for getting that done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now, may I request Mr. Bhupinder Singh Bhalla, Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, to kindly deliver his inaugural address. Sir, please.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Alok Kumar, the India chair for the ETWG meeting which is happening here. And of course, he's also Secretary, Ministry of Power. Mr. Dinesh Jagdale, Joint Secretary, MNRE, Mr. Sumant Sinha, Chairperson, GWAC India, and of course, Chairman, Renew, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be addressing you today in this side event focusing on offshore wind. The event comes at an appropriate time when India is gearing up to become a major player in the global offshore wind sector. As my colleagues mentioned, offshore wind is emerging as a significant sector to achieve the energy transition that we are looking for. The world is acknowledging it as a robust technology, solution for delivering clean and affordable power to buyers, a solution for climate change and air pollution mitigation. It facilitates energy security and grid resilience, and most importantly, it boosts job creation opportunities. IEA and IRENA have separately projected a minimum threshold of 2,000 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity globally by the mid-century to meet the 1.5-degree target that we have set ourselves, or we want to pursue, for limiting the temperature rise. The offshore wind sector is rapidly emerging as a commercially viable solution to support the rapid clean energy transition. As per the Global Wind Report 2023, the world has already installed almost 64 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity. In the short term, between 2023 and 2027, 130 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity is likely to be added worldwide, and India doesn't want to lose that pie of it. In 2020, 99.3% of total offshore wind capacity and nearly all installed ocean energy capacity globally was found in G20 countries, according to IRENA. So, having this side event on the, when we have the working group meeting currently under progress, is to illustrate the importance that the G20 countries are playing in the rise of this sector. India's G20 presidency is an opportunity for offshore wind countries, businesses, and financial institutions to work together and build on mutual strengths to support national, regional, and global offshore wind and clean energy transition ambitions. Recognizing the potential and benefits of offshore wind, India has been undertaking important strides in harnessing offshore wind. As Dinesh had mentioned, a lot of work we have been doing in this sector in India to start the installations. Between 2013 to 2018, a consortium led by Global Wind Energy Council, GWAC, and supported by European Union and MNRE, and of course the NIWE, our wind energy arm, as a knowledge partner, executed the facilitating offshore wind in India. That's, we did that. And this work comprised of grid integration, supply chain, and feasibility studies for offshore wind projects off the coasts of Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, two of the high potential states for India. Government of India notified the National Offshore Wind Energy Policy 2015. The policy provides for offshore wind power development up to a seaward distance of 200 nautical miles from the baseline. That is up to the country's exclusive economic zone. To further strengthen and highlight India's outlook for offshore wind, in 2022, last year, MNRE notified its strategy paper, which included an indicative 37 gigawatt of seabed lease tender trajectory, bidding trajectory by 2030. That's our ambition for this decade. We are very glad, we're happy that Government of Tamil Nadu and Government of Gujarat have already expressed their willingness to purchase offshore wind power generated off their respective coasts at a tariff of, a very competitive tariff of 4 rupees per unit for the initial few projects. And as you know, otherwise our tariffs, either of course for solar, even for wind, onshore wind, are much lower. But to start this process in India and to kick off the initial projects, both states have agreed to buy the power at 4 rupees, offshore wind power at 4 rupees, and I think that's a very big step. Government has a role to kickstart new things. I mean, we take it on ourselves to do that because we understand that the private sector, which looks at returns and look at cost and the entire viability, is a little hesitant in the beginning because of the risk involved. So how do we de-risk that sector is, that's how we try to support in the beginning, and all the effort that we've been making, Government of India is making, is towards that, kick-starting the offshore wind process in India. The ministry has also forged successful international partnerships to draw best practices in the area of offshore wind. I'm very happy to announce that the first offshore wind seabed lease tender is likely to be rolled out soon. We're just working on the final aspects of that. And it would be one of the initial steps to foster the offshore wind sector in India. We also plan to do a viability gap funding for the initial part of offshore wind capacity. Again, we are waiting for final approvals, and once we do that, we will of course announce the extent of that. But we would be, in fact, going on both kinds of models. One, of course, would be through VGF funding, where there would be, bidding will be done on the basis of the lowest VGF somebody would request for on a fixed tariff. On the other hand, there would be other models where it would be differently auctioned, and and bids would be invited. The intention is to use every possible way to attract investments in this sunrise sector as far as India is concerned. As was mentioned, we have a huge target to achieve. We need to reach the 500 gigawatt target. Wind energy is very important for because of the intermittence of solar energy, so it has to be balanced out by wind energy, and since the time is different, the season is different, a lot of we can balance when we use, and as you know, you're all well aware that if you combine it or balance it out, it would be essential for grid stability in India. And offshore wind is no different. So we would, the potential that in fact we see, the total potential that we've seen, we've estimated off the coast of Tamil Nadu and Gujarat itself is 70 gigawatts. But if you consider the entire, exclusive economic zone of India, the potential is much larger. And we would start the process, of course, with Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, but of course, we would be very ambitious. We'll be very ambitious in going out for try the other states as well. We hope that this G20 official side event on offshore wind is useful to all stakeholders and provides the audience and participants with a brief but enriching overview of the global offshore wind sector and the challenges and opportunities in the context of finance and capacity building. I've seen the two panel discussions which follow this opening session, and and I think there'll be and of course the impeccable expertise of the participants in both panels, and I think it'll be very rewarding for us to understand and take suggestions from you on how to improve the way forward as far as we are concerned. I hope the side event helps to identify the opportunities and secure opportunities for collaborations and partnerships that would drive offshore wind ambitions in India as well as globally. I wish you all success and thank you, and look forward to hearing later from our colleagues on the recommendations that you bring out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now, we are very honored to have Mr. Alok Kumar, ETWG Chair and Secretary, Ministry of Power, Government of India. Sir, may I request you to kindly deliver your special address?
Good morning. My colleague, Shri Bhupendra Bhalla ji, Shri Dinesh Jagdale, and Suman Sinha ji, all dear participants. It's a very valuable perspective we are getting in Mumbai, these meetings, moving from one hall to another hall. In another hall, we are discussing and negotiating and looking at what is the global perspective and the viewpoints of different countries on the draft communique we are trying to set up for our energy ministerial in Goa. And now moving to this hall, in between is a very different, very focused, say, sectoral discussion on offshore wind. So we may call it a side event. I think it's not a side event, it's a very side event, connotes something not very important, but I find this type of sessions and gatherings are very, very useful for information sharing, because when the people come together for meetings like Energy Transition Working Group, we have a lot of expertise, and only part of it is utilized in the main communique discussions. Those are mostly like political national positions, but the rich experience which we can get here, I think these side events they are very valuable events, and I must congratulate MNRE, the Global Wind Energy Council, and NIWE for convening this very important event and on this topic of offshore wind. I think a lot of things have been mentioned by my previous speakers. I could partly hear what Mr. Suman Sinha was saying, and I very carefully listened to what Bhupendra Bhalla ji was saying. That perspective, I like to add few things, what I see from perspective of energy transition as well as from perspective of India's power sector. That will be, I think, maybe of some use to you. Otherwise, the broad perspective, what is the global scenario and what is all required for taking this forward, and what MNRE is doing, it has been very well mentioned by my colleague Bhupendra Bhalla ji. Talking of energy transition, say every country has its own energy endowments, and every country aspires that the energy transition should not affect its economic growth, its trade positions, and it should have, is it all right? It should have, like this, yeah. Yeah, it should have secure energy supply as well as reduce maybe import dependence. It should its own resources. That is a position, common strategy which every country is following, and India is also one of them. And in fact, in one of the exercise we are doing in Ministry of Power with active participation and cooperation of our sister ministries in energy sector, is preparing a vision for 2047. And our key goals are that we need to have adequate energy in a competitive, affordable, and reliable manner for supporting India's economic growth, as well as raising our standards of living for our citizens, so that our aspiration is to become a developed country by 2047. That is the broad energy transition what we are trying to do. So it is not only for within energy sector. Energy sector is very important for supporting the country's economic growth. So that is the perspective we are discussing, and multiple scenarios have been worked out. As I see, by 2030 and beyond, currently we are depending very heavily on solar. That has its own challenges. If you depend just on one, like, type of supply chain you need, the materials, the land, and moreover the type of intermittency and grid management. So focusing on just one resource is not advisable from the India's energy transition perspective. So one is looking at developing hydropower potential, also trying to add more of nuclear power stations. We are also attempting the carbon capture and utilization. Several things are being attempted, and we had side events on all of them. But to my mind, offshore wind is one segment, one resource, which of course has some challenges, which doesn't have many problems which are there in the other resources. On your thermal power stations, so there is a limitation. If you have too much, then you also need to add too much of, which is very expensive. And it impinges on our competitive power, because if we make our trade competitiveness, our export competitiveness, so we need to find a good mix which can be taken forward quickly, so that we can achieve our nationally determined contribution, as well as it keeps our cost of electricity in control. While talking to Suman Sinha ji, I think we were discussing that generally 50 to 60 gigawatt is one figure which India can see maybe in next 2 decades or so in the offshore wind. If you compare, today large hydro is around the same, it is around 47 gigawatt. And whole larger efforts are going into the nuclear energy, which is also we are talking of 50 gigawatt maybe in next 20 years or so. Currently we are only 7,000. But you compare the challenges in those development of hydropower and nuclear power stations, they are very huge. And even efforts being made are also very huge as compared to offshore wind. So I was hearing to Bhupendra Bhalla ji that we made a policy in 2015, we're trying to do. I was wondering how many things MNRE will do and what all you will require to do. You got a green hydrogen mission, which is itself a big challenge, like fighting a full war, full battle. And then you have offshore wind, you have storage and all. So, but placing it in the India's power sector, offshore wind can play a very important role. That is one big statement or the major view I would like to share here. We need to do more. It compares almost the potential of what we are going to add in the large hydro or what we are going to do in nuclear. Nuclear is good. There is a parallel side event going on nuclear, so we can't say nuclear is not important. Nuclear is good. But nuclear has many challenges of safeguards, arranging fuel, their construction time, their construction costs, or they're not easier than say, the offshore wind is not more difficult than the nuclear power stations. Similarly, if you talk of the hydropower stations, they are damn difficult. Literally very, very difficult. If you have to develop a hydropower station of maybe even 3,000 megawatt, the type of preparations you require, type of efforts you require, and type of uncertainties you face, they are very huge as compared to the offshore wind. So, in my view, as Power Secretary, we need to pay greater attention in a more urgent manner to the offshore wind. It's a very important resource which is going to balance our energy supply. It might reduce even the storage requirement if we do it. it will help on our peak demand management. I was thinking this morning, say if we have a lot of offshore wind in the evening, for the sake of reliability, we can keep some of the old coal-based power stations. If there is any emergency, you can run them. Maybe occasionally for 10% or 20% PLF in a year. What is the harm? Because overall we'll support offshore wind. So we have taken a position in Ministry of Power also that let us not hurry up retiring the old coal-based power plant. They can support a lot of large-scale renewable energy integration, because the coal, some people may say bad, but it is very good to promote renewable energy also, because we need those support. So let us do whatever is possible, whatever is required for this offshore wind. I have one suggestion. Let us not stick to just this 500 gigawatt by 2030. Because offshore wind, we have to look beyond. Because if we limit our vision to 500 gigawatt 2030 for offshore wind, that will not do justice, because we were thinking of this waiver of the transmission charges, IST charges for offshore wind. So cutoff date itself is going beyond 2030. So offshore wind, we need to have a perspective maybe up to 2040. I think that is one suggestion. Second suggestion is, though it may lead to multiplicity of missions, but I strongly feel we need a mission on offshore wind, because doing a policy, a poor joint secretary doing it offshore wind is one of his subjects, will not be able to do what all it requires. Mr. Suman Sinha was speaking. It is, the technology is there, but type of infrastructure development we need, type of supply chains we need for manufacturing for survey of offshore wind and manufacturing the wind mills, installation of wind, and then transmission lines and all. I think it is not going to be less complex than green hydrogen mission. It requires a full-fledged mission. That is one recommendation you can deliberate, and maybe if you agree, we can come out with that recommendation, because government needs a lot of support from the intellectuals. On the on the transmission need side, fortunately, we have a very robust grid, which is supporting today a generation capacity of 416 gigawatt. And with the transmission plan for 500 gigawatt in place, we will have a transmission grid which will support a generation capacity of close to 800 gigawatt in next 8 years. So that way is our strength as compared to other countries in the world, which are very small power systems. So they have a limitation at, they can't escalate offshore wind to a large extent. Let me give an example of Sri Lanka, just for the sake of reference. Sri Lanka, when they are thinking of offshore wind, their grid size is so small that cannot absorb maybe more than 500 gigawatt or maybe 8,000 gigawatt offshore wind, because it will have a lot of problems in their power system. So they need to, there's a value for them to connect to India's grid system. So if you see the positives we have huge power demand, we have a robust national grid, and we have a dedicated Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. It is not there in many countries. So there have been people have been talking of merging to ministries. I am dead against. Say MNRE had this role, because MNRE is looking at the new technologies which needs very dedicated attention. So we have, I think, a lot of good pieces already in place. We need to start up a mission, go hog haul. And I also feel that in the planning scenario of Central Electricity Authority, offshore wind has to figure more prominently. It's only a margin, somewhere we talk. Like 100 or 80 gigawatt of offshore wind, they talk maybe 8 gigawatt will come or 10 gigawatt will come. We need to do more, say, long-term perspective planning, so that there is a visibility to the stakeholders. If you are going to set up some manufacturing facilities, some supply chains, it will not come unless until CA comes with a energy mix perspective for power sector up to 2040. If you project a projection that, okay, India is going to do maybe 40, 50 gigawatt in the next maybe 15 years or so, it will give more confidence to the investors to come to India and to do. On the transmission side per se, grid is there, and connecting offshore wind farms to our grid is not going to be a challenge. We have to work for a time frame that by the time your generation is coming, we are ready with the grid. Our grid is very strong. We have all technologies. Maybe you have raised one issue of the cable shortage in the world. So that means it needs even, say, planning more in advance, other what we are thinking of. So we are prepared, and these were my thoughts. One thing, our offshore wind also addresses the land issue, because for a populous country like India, many people have started now raising the issue of land availability for the renewable energy, even for the green hydrogen, for solar. So offshore wind is a very good resource. And I'm very sure what happened to solar PV from 18 rupees to now 2.5, maybe same thing can happen to offshore wind, maybe from, say, 7 rupees to, say, below 4 rupees if we all work together. And I extend my best wishes to this event, and we will sincerely look forward to the recommendations of this group to take forward this mission of offshore wind. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think this has been a very enlightening and very insightful plenary session for all of us. Now, may I request Mr. Sumant Sinha, Chairperson, GWEG India, to kindly present a token of gratitude. We have a memento to Mr. Alok Kumar, ETWG Chair and Secretary, Ministry of Power, Government of India. Sir, please. Now, may I also request Mr. Sumant Sinha, Chairperson, GWEG India, to kindly present a memento to Mr. Bhupender Singh Bhalla, Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India. Sir. May I request Mr. Sumant Sinha, Chairperson, GWEG India, to kindly present the memento to Mr. Dinesh Dayanand Jagdale, Joint Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India. May I request Mr. Bhupender Singh Bhalla, Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, to kindly present the memento to Mr. Sumant Sinha, Chairperson, GWEG India. Thank you very much, sir. May I request our esteemed panelists to kindly join for a group photograph, sir? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this was a very insightful plenary session, and I see that the room is fully packed, and we are still receiving requests from our stakeholders for joining this event. There are many stakeholders who have joined us online, and they are viewing the live streaming of this event. Thank you to the fantastic events management team and the IT team. Now, with this, we move on to our first panel discussion, role of global offshore wind sector in reaching net zero targets. Now, to open this session, may I request Ms. Rebecca Williams, Global Head of Offshore Wind, Global Wind Energy Council, to kindly join us on the dais. May I also request Dr. Rajesh Katyal, Director General Additional Charge, National Institute of Wind Energy, Government of India, to kindly join us on the dais. May I also request Mr. Dinesh Dayanand Jagdale, Joint Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, to kindly join us on the dais. May I request Dr. Jan Willem Javartin, CEO, Service India and Sri Lanka, Siemens Gamesa, to kindly join us on the dais. May I request Mr. Parag Sharma, Founder and CEO, O2 Power, to kindly join us on the dais. May I request Mr. Mohit Bhargava, CEO, NTPC Renewable Energy Limited, to kindly join us on the dais. May I also request Mr. Alp Gunzever, Head of Secretariat, Center of Excellence for Offshore Wind and Renewable Energy, to kindly join us on the dais. Please. Hi. May I also invite His Excellency Ambassador Mr. Thomas Anker Christensen, Climate Ambassador of Denmark, Government of Denmark, to kindly join us on the dais. Ms. Moderator, now the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you. I'll come up here in the first instance. So I'm joined here on stage by a large and illustrious panel. So let's just have one round of applause for the panelists. Thank you. So welcome to this panel on the role of the global offshore wind sector in reaching net zero targets. As we've already heard from the plenary session, globally we're seeing a huge demand now for offshore wind across the world. So from its beginnings in the North Sea, and we're joined here by Ambassador Christian Anker, sorry. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's better. Not quite made for short people. Thank you. So as I mentioned, we're joined here by Ambassador Anker Christensen, who represents that North Sea beginning for the offshore wind sector. And we're seeing now many emerging markets ramping up their efforts. And in my role, actually, I travel around the world advising governments and industry in those emerging markets. And it's fair to say I haven't been at home much lately, actually. In 2020, IRENA and GWEC signed a UN Energy Compact to meet 380 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 and 2,000 gigawatts by 2050. And as we've heard, we're making excellent progress towards that global target. So we now have 64 gigawatts of offshore wind deployed globally. And actually in GWEC's outlook, we're seeing that on offshore wind targets alone, we're making excellent progress towards that goal. But as we all know here, it's not just about targets. It's about implementation. And offshore wind requires collaboration across the policy spectrum and putting in place the right policy frameworks to deliver that ambition. So with that in mind, we consider the role of India's first offshore wind tender in the near future, and we heard some very positive announcements on that front in the previous session. And consider the role that India can play in that global outlook for offshore wind. I think it's fair to say that to really seize the opportunity for India, it will require robust partnership working between government, industry, and financial institutions, and putting in place those right policy frameworks. So this panel session will explore what India can learn from other offshore wind markets, and what role that India can play in other emerging markets too, how we can build out an agenda of international cooperation on this agenda, and what priorities should the Indian government pursue, both at state and federal level, in order to build a swift and sustainable offshore wind industry. So without further ado, I will invite our first speaker, Dr. Rajesh Katyal, who will deliver a scene-setting presentation on the role of offshore wind in India. Dr. Katyal, the floor is yours.
Well, very good morning to all of you. And it is indeed a great pleasure standing before all of you on this momentous occasion when Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, together with its technical arm, National Institute of Wind Energy and Global Wind Energy Council, is organizing a side event on offshore wind development in the country. And in the presentation area today, I would be discussing briefly about the activities which Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, together with National Institute of Wind Energy, has covered till date for fostering the growth rate of offshore wind in the country. And just to give you the numbers, that globally about 63.4 gigawatt is the installed capacity worldwide, and out of which China has taken a lead role with about 28.6 gigawatt at the present moment. The UK stands second with about 12.5 gigawatt. The Germany is number third with about 7.5 gigawatt, and thereafter the Denmark and Netherlands are at fourth and fifth positions with 2.9 and 2.3 gigawatt capacities, and rest of the country has covered, rest of the world countries have covered about 4 gigawatt. And I'm very happy to inform you that India also has a big coastline of about 7,600 kilometers, and out of which the NIWE's efforts to measure about 74 coastal locations, where you can see these green dots along the coastline, where over the period of years, the National Institute of Wind Energy has covered these measurements. And I'm also very happy to inform that Gujarat has the longest coastline of about 1,600 kilometers, where we have covered something about 16 mast locations, ranging from 20 to 120 meter level. And Tamil Nadu, of course, has a coastline of about 1,076 kilometers, where we have covered something about 20 mast locations out of these 74 locations. And as a first step, National Institute of Wind Energy has come up with the offshore wind map up to 200 nautical miles, which is exclusive up to the exclusive economic zone. And here, what we have done is that we have taken the data from QuickSat, the USA-based satellite, and then prepared this finer resolution map with a finer grid resolution of 0.25 degrees into 0.25 degrees. In simple words, it means 25 kilometers into 25 kilometers. And you can see down south at Gulf of Mannar, the red color picture, it indicates that in Tamil Nadu, the wind speeds are as good as 9.5 to 10 meters per second on an average, which would mean that it comes under the class 1 site as per the International Electrotechnical Commission standards. And when you move towards the western coast of Gujarat, the winds are rather modest, which is something about 7.5 to 7.8 meters per second on an average. And when you further move to the elevated hills of Goa, Kerala, and Karnataka, the winds at the first 100 to 150 meter level are not very encouraging, and that would mean that it is not very good for offshore wind formability. And with this, I would like to highlight some of the points which the ministry together with NIWE has done. And the first activity which we started was that ministry came up with the policy in 2015, which was notified offshore policy, wherein the ministry was the nodal ministry and NIWE will be the nodal agency. And thereafter, we have also, all of you are aware that NIWE installed the first LiDAR-based measurements in 2017. The reports were prepared. It is available for the benefit of the public domain in the website of ministry and NIWE, which indicated that Gujarat is under, the Gulf of Kambat is under 7.9 meters per second, which is class 3 sites. Then we also came up with the resource estimation, assuming that the wind turbine density will be about 5 megawatt per square kilometer, with which we understood that 35 to 37 gigawatt can be the potential in Tamil Nadu coast and 35 to 37 in Gujarat coast as well. But there is something that some people have a feeling that we have much more potential, but this we need to recheck with the fresh long-term measurements to take much more informed and better decisions. And thereafter, we have also come up in 2018, the private guidelines. We wanted to open up this measurements technique, not only NIWE and the government bodies doing the measurements. I think we have opened up for the private stakeholders so as to fast track the measurement process until 2000, maybe 25 or 26, so that private stakeholders, in that process, 2 developers have already approached NIWE. One has already completed in Gujarat coast, and second one is in pipelines where we are fast tracking their clearance protocols. And then, CTU has also planned about 10 gigawatt of installed capacities for the transmission line networks, 5 gigawatt in Gujarat and 5 gigawatt in Tamil Nadu as well. And moving forward, we have also come up with a strategy paper wherein the NIWE has provided the technical inputs and ministry has come up with the strategy paper for all the model 4s, which will now be, most of you are already aware about the model, so I will not be touching on that. But model 4 will be a new addition wherein, they are opening up the entire coastlines other than the zones which ministry and NIWE has, identified. And then, Government of Gujarat and Government of Tamil Nadu both have also agreed to procure this, power at the rate of ₹4 for the fostering the growth of offshore wind in the country. And the ministry has also come up with a viability gap funding note wherein, we wanted to give under Model 1 for Gujarat for viability gap funding and 2 gigawatt for Tamil Nadu, which the note is in the advanced stage for the approval from the Ministry of Finance. And then, Ministry has also prepared the lease rules, which has already been sent to Ministry of External Affairs, which is in the final process of, clearances, and soon it will be approved. It will be made in public for the benefit of the stakeholders. And then, the revised strategy paper I've already touched upon. And last but least, but all of you are already aware that the tender document is already prepared for Model 3 for seabed leasing. The final stages of comments, as Secretary Sir mentioned, has already been taken, and soon Ministry will come out for its publications. Through Model 3 will be done by NIWE, and Model 1 will be done by Solar Energy Corporation. And what I was mentioning you, that NIWE has come up with the offshore map, and the second step what we have done is that with the help of the FOWIND, which Secretary Sir was mentioning, we have superimposed these 7 to 8 zones on the Gujarat coast of Gulf of Kambat, as well as in the Gulf of Mannar coast of Tamil Nadu. And when we have approached to the Ministry of Defense for Gujarat, they have only notified the 5 zones for the offshore development because they feel that CGH will be little restricted for the country's security as such. And for that purpose, they have only notified 5 zones in Gujarat and 7 zones in Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu, they have approved all the zones, only the H zone has been, stopped for country security. And moving forward, we have also tied up with Danish Technical University. We have come up with a high density resolution map, which is to the tune of about 150-meter level, because you will appreciate the offshore turbines are growing higher in heights. So it makes sense that we should come up with the map at 150-meter level. And you can see that at Gulf of Kambat, we have also superimposed these zones on these maps. And here we can feel that this green color at the Gulf of Kutch is a very little patch, which is to the tune of about 7 meters per second. And the second thing is that in Gulf of Kutch, it is more seismic prone area, so that will also add to the cost of levelized cost of energy generation. And then, we have also, I was mentioning that we have done these LiDAR measurements at Pipavav Bandara port, which is about 24 kilometers from the Pipavav port. And here, we have done extensive measurements for 2 years using LiDAR. The report, as I mentioned, has already been made public. And this zone is basically clear from the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change perspective. It comes under Zone 4, which would mean that there are no issues with regard to eco-sensitive or the biodiversity issues. The sites at Gujarat are particularly clear to immediately take off the offshore projects. And then, the other activity which NIWE has done is in Gujarat, we have done the geophysical studies as well as the geotechnical studies. As a part of the geophysical studies, we have covered the entire 365 square kilometer zone, which has been identified for putting up the first gigawatt project. And you can see that at the top portion, there is a red color, which means that the bathymetry or the depth of the waters are 8 meters. And when you move downwards, it comes to the blue color, which is something about 18 to 20 meters. So the sea is dynamic. And this measurement was done in 2018. Probably there can be slight variations in the water depths as now, because the 3-4 years have gone by. And also, we have also done 5 geotechnical borehole studies up to a depth of 60 meters. Because as per international standards, the turbines of 14 megawatt or 15 megawatt plus, the pile foundation has to go up to 60 meters. So what we have done, we have taken the soil samples at every 1 meter or 1.5 meters level. And then we have done their all physical and chemical properties by checking the liquid limits, the plastic limits, the bearing capacity, the shear strength. And you can see that curve on the top right, which indicates the shear strength of the soil. And this is the very useful parameter in determining the bearing capacity of the soil, which provides useful pointers in designing the pile or concrete caisson or tri-pile foundations, because these offshore structures are subjected to both static and dynamic loadings due to the movement of blades. So this has been done for the first gigawatt Gujarat project, where we have done 3 holes, adjoining which Gujarat government is planning to go for 2 gigawatt. We have also done 2 boreholes there, so that can be provided useful pointers to the developers. This report we have not made in public because we feel that this has to be approved by the Ministry of Defense. We are in the advanced stage of getting it clearances, and once that is being done, we will be making this in public for the benefit of the stakeholders. And then, we have also done the rapid environmental impact assessment studies at the Gulf of, Pipavav. And you can see, Gulf of Kambat. The red color is the area for which has been identified for 365 kilometers. And the violet color line which you are seeing is the buffer zone, which we have seen that surrounding 10 kilometers to that, there won't be any eco-sensitive biodiversity issues. We have also seen that there are no whale shark paths for fishing tracks. We have also seen that there is no turtle nest near to the sites. There are no salt lakes, so that everything is clear from that, and these are the pictorial photographs of the coast of Gujarat coast. And adjoining there is a lot of seabed area where they can do multi-gigawatts of offshore projects. And then, we have also done this micro-siting for Gujarat, where we have taken the low-rated turbines of 6 to 8 megawatt, wherein we have kept the spacing between 6 to 7 times the diameter, and row to row we have kept about 14 times the diameter. And we have kept these 1 gigawatt into the modules of 250 megawatts. And then there will be a point of common coupling, which will be a spooling substation, from where something about 24 kilometers export cable of 220 kV AC can be taken and then connected to the GUVNL substation at the Gujarat coast. And you can see this 3D pictorial view which our ground team has done on the softwares. This is how we have determined the plant load factors and the energy yield predictions, which we can further fine tune when the developers do the entire surveys and then they come up with the higher rating machines, so that we can see what could be the plant load factors. And similarly for Tamil Nadu also, we have taken the high resolution density map of Danish Technical University in their collaborations, and we have superimposed these zones for model 3, which will be immediately coming up in the tender. You can see this 1 to 4, which is earmarked, is for model 3. And then the downside, the zones are for the phase 2 of the model 3, which is about 5.7 gigawatt. And finally, for model 2, we have kept the balanced zones. All these zones have been identified, and I would like to show you what we have done in the next slide, that we have also done with the help of Danish Energy Agency, the marine spatial planning. And you can see on the bottom part where there is a shaded portion, the best zones which we identified was B, G, and H as per our nomenclatures. And you can see half of the portion of B and G is going in the shaded portion because there is an intense traffic movement, marine movement from international shipping, which is going to Sri Lanka and to the neighbor countries. So that is why, in the revised tender, we have modified these zones. And we are now coming up with the modified zones, which will be soon published in the public domain. And you can also see in that green colors, which are basically dugong areas, which has also been covering in the C zone or A zones, which has been left out. And little bit of red color, which is an international marine mammal area, which has also been removed. And utmost care has been taken that these zones are free from all kinds of hindrances or obstacles for developing the offshore projects. And the final at the right corner down is the final zones, which will be now, coming up in the revised tenders. And these are the enlarged views of all the zones, which has been identified collectively by Ministry and NIWE with the help of international players, Danish Energy, and even with the help of UK support. And we have also done, this is one very important point, that normally when we go for the first phase of 4 gigawatt, we have seen that each zone will be about 200 square kilometer, wherein we can fit 1 gigawatt, and the spacing between the two zones will be about 1 kilometer for the first project. But keeping into consideration the future projects like phase 2 and phase 3, whenever they will come, I personally feel that they will give some kind of wake effects, because when the free flow wind is traveling, the rear turbines at the back will get affected because of the obstructions and obstacles of the towers and the support structures. So for that purpose, in advance, NIWE has also done the micro-siting for the Model 3 Phase 2 and also for the Phase 3 for Model 2. And then we have worked out, keeping into consideration the 15 megawatt, which is the largest turbine, and we feel that in future, we might have to increase the spacing between the zones from 1 kilometer to 3.5 kilometer to keep the wake losses well within the limits as prescribed by the guidelines of the ministry within 10%. But at the moment, we will not do any changes for the phase Model 3.1 because that will go with the 1 kilometer. Any small changes we will do in phase 2 and phase 3, keeping learning with our, as a learning curve and trying to incorporate in our future protocols. So what it gives a message is that for Model 1, the plant load factors are 49% to 52%. And if you go second, then it can be slightly 1 or 2% reduced. But the only way to accommodate is we will have to increase the spacings of the zones. And this is the 3D view for this. And as Joint Secretary Sir has also mentioned, that I will not touch more on this, because this is what the port study Danish Energy Agency has done for the Pipavav port as well as for the Tuticorin port. And the indicative numbers which they have mentioned is about 622 crores for Pipavav for strengthening, for their shore reclamations, the dredging, and also the constructions of the dock yachts, and about 720 crores for the Tuticorin port. And this, I think Ministry and Ministry of Shipping is on work out to find out what would be the business models for taking this offshore at the fast track mode. And also I would like to mention that NIWE, along with the support of Ministry, is also planning to come up with an offshore exclusive test center at Dhanushkodi, and where we will be having 2 test beds. The detailed project report has already been prepared by NIWE, and now we are working on the financial mechanism as to how this 350 to 400 crores can be, funded so that this project can be taken up. And with this, we will have an exclusive offshore test center, not only in India, but in the entire, it will be serving to the entire Southeast Asian countries as well. And 1 minute, madam. And the only thing which I want to highlight is that we are also planning to go for 2 more turbines, because the Rameshwaram village has to be made totally green, which is the vision of our late Honorable President of the country, Dr. Abdul Kalam sir, because with these 2 weather-driven renewables, wind and solar, we can electrify the total Rameshwaram village along with this Dhanushkodi test center. And we will also plan 1 jetty here, which can also be useful for boating purposes, because from the Rameshwaram temple going towards Tuticorin port, this jetty can be useful for sightseeing for the public, apart from the wind farm projects. And lastly, because madam is already rushing, and this already sir has mentioned that we have a long trajectory of 37 gigawatts, and year-on-year basis, we will be tendering through Ministry, SECI or NIWE. And this will give a huge pipeline to the developers for going to the offshore wind. So the message here is that offshore wind will definitely contribute towards the India's energy transition of net zero carbon dioxide, reducing this. This will definitely help in contributing towards reducing the carbon dioxide emissions. And with this concluding remarks, and second last point, what I also want to mention, that there is an element of fear in the mindsets of developers that their projects can be delayed because of the clearance protocols, both from the central ministries and state departments. From part of ministry as well as a NIWE being the nodal agency, I assure you that we will do all the clearances protocol, whether it is from central ministries or state departments, in a fast track mode, so that it may not affect your construction activities at any point in time.
That's
so with this, I
fantastic to
thank
hear.
all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kartial. Thank you for that detailed explanation of the next steps in India. Fantastic. We're going to open the panel session now. We've got a lot to get through and quite a few panelists. But we're going to turn first to Mr. Jagdali, to the Joint Secretary. and ask for your perspectives on that presentation. So, Mr. Jagdali, I mean, you've been leading action on a diverse portfolio of renewable energies, as we heard earlier. How important do you think that offshore wind is in that energy mix?
Thank you, Rebecca, and again, thank you for coming straightway and moderating this session. But on a lighter note, I think Dr. Katyal has said everything that we were supposed to say. So, but very good, that's an entire, very good presentation. I think that shows the robustness of the approach that we as government and our institution has been taking, and that is to ensure that the sector kicks off on a brilliant path on the way how the meticulous planning is done. But to answer your question, I think two things are very critical in our approach. One is our commitment towards our long-term targets, but also on what, as Secretary Ministry of Power was suggesting, what we are going to do by 2030 and beyond up to 2070. Now, in that transition journey, we as a country have taken a very thoughtful decision that we will, as far as possible, go towards accelerating the renewable energy additions into this country. While our target has been 50% of the capacities by 2030 coming from non-fossil, and we do believe that this, the journey of Indian transition way back in, as I mentioned in my opening remarks as well, has been led by wind, but has been now during the last decade taken over by solar. But what we believe together will now go is together with wind and solar, there will be a kind of different innovative business models that will come into play. But the contribution factors in this business models will come from wind and solar. Now, as we are moving from 43 gigawatts to a capacity of 100 gigawatts, onshore has been there, onshore will still continue, but we are at this moment rightly started on a very positive path of 37 gigawatts of bids to be issued by 2030. And as in the next 2 decades, you will find the emergence of offshore sector into this Indian platform. Offshore has a play. There are so many thought leaders and think tanks and policy researchers have come up with business models across the Indian wind regime. And what NIWE has done as well, it shows that the kind of generation, the kind of wind pattern that we have, it actually coincides or it correlates, it supports the Indian demand regime. If you look at Gujarat, the kind of consistent pattern that the wind has, it actually will help the Indian transition very fast. It will actually help in three things, in fact. It will help to reduce the storage cost. It will help to also ensure that the kind of vulnerability as we all speak, the intermittency as speak, by adding offshore will be getting reduced. That is not going to hamper our ramp-up requirements. And so, therefore, as a collective path, offshore is going to be very, very important, critical stream of a technology resource, and out of all renewable energy technologies, considering the resource, considering the availability of the long coastline, it is 7,600 kilometers as Dr. Katyal spoke, but we also have the islands which also add to this coastline. So there is a huge path, and I was, just before I conclude, we were given a presentation by some eminent scientists from the Lawrence Berkeley, which mentioned that the kind of potential we have is much more than 70. It's almost 1,000 gigawatts of potential that we can harness. But obviously coming back to the technical potential and limiting the depth to less than 1,300 meters, I think very easily we can reach to that 400, 500 gigawatt of potential, which will actually help the India to move towards net zero in an accelerated path. So offshore is critical, and we are committed to make that critical become soon as a part of our energy transition journey. Thank you.
And can I ask maybe a cheeky follow-up question then? We heard earlier that the tender round will be announced soon and shortly.
Yeah.
Are you able to be any more specific on those timings?
Yes. Two approaches. Model one, as we speak, where we are committing a viability gap funding for actually reducing the levelized cost or bridging the levelized cost of energy, and what discounts, as we were told today, that about 4 rupees is the cost of purchase. So the Ministry of Finance has given us the clearance for the first set of 1 gigawatt, Obviously, after this clearance, we'll have to go to the 2 phases. We'll have to conduct an expenditure finance committee meeting and go to the cabinet government of India to take the final proposal. The major approval process from the Ministry of Finance has been received, and that's a good note, and that shows the commitment as well. The second path, which we're working with all the stakeholders, and thanks to very, very knowledgeable people, including the World Bank, DE, and others, who have supported us and all the stakeholder commitments. So the last stakeholder consultation, which we did, and many of your members were present during that consultation, we have received some very important 2-3 key suggestions. One is on the transmission, and one is on the timing that is required to do the study survey permits, study surveys and permits. And therefore, what we are doing is we are revisiting that. But I believe, based on the progress that we are making, probably it's another 4 to 6 weeks of time, you will see the tender.
Thank you. Thanks for elaborating on that. That's really good to hear. Okay, I want to move now to Ambassador Christensen. Hi, Thomas, right at the end there. And I want to turn to you. Obviously, Denmark has played a leading role in the development of offshore wind. But also, I know, obviously, that we work together on the Global Offshore Wind Alliance as well. So I wondered if you could expand on thoughts around India's role in the global picture, and also how we can achieve collaboration on offshore wind globally.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for having Denmark in this panel. We are extremely happy and proud to be partnering with India in supporting the Indian transition. And I think the first presentation, which also highlighted the technical dimension of the cooperation, the Danish Energy Agency's support for the marine spatial planning off the coast of both Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, the work on the port infrastructure and everything else is really part of our cooperation. And maybe just one comment on the port infrastructure is that is a dimension that obviously the industry present in the room knows shouldn't be taken lightly, but also that is a cost that has to be covered and carried maybe outside the scope of the first project, because definitely that is sort of a framework condition that is not a regulatory one or a financial one, but a very physical one in terms of putting in place the infrastructure that is needed to allow the industry to take off. And in the very first slide we saw, which had sort of the distribution of offshore wind globally, it was mentioned that China obviously is number 1 by far, but then UK, Germany, Denmark, Netherlands. I think actually most of the offshore wind in the North Sea that was in that chart comes off Denmark and is shipped out of the Danish ports and based on Danish port infrastructure, because we were the first mover in the North Sea, and in that sense have helped provide the industrial base for also our neighbors. And going forward, the Danish Prime Minister has led the push amongst her peers around the North Sea and inviting them to a summit last year in our port city of Esbjerg, where they set a joint target of 65 gigawatt of offshore wind in the North Sea by 2030 and 150 giga in the North Sea by 2050. That's sort of our joint commitment. And through the Global Offshore Wind Alliance that Denmark with GWEC and IRENA launched last year at COP, and which we do hope that India will join soon, we have brought together a coalition of countries that are currently in their plans for installed capacity by 2030, almost at the 380 gigawatt mark, the challenge that you set out for us. It is a coalition that has as its purpose to create that common platform of learning, both in terms of how to do the permission process at speed, because that is what takes the longest time for governments around the world. We are in Denmark probably the fastest, and it still takes us on average 7 years to go through the permitting process, and that has to do with all the environmental regulations and the environmental assessments that have to be done, and we are in a process with the European Commission on creating a fast-track process where we might not have to do things sequentially, but actually can do more assessments at the same time, because the construction phase for an offshore wind farm is not more than, well, 1, 2, maybe 3 years at most. So it is really the permitting process that takes time, and we think that by all governments that are actually keen on doing this, we can have a joint learning platform where we can all help each other to do this in a much more coherent and faster way. But then a second item for the coalition is to look at the market mechanisms and how markets and the way you actually price offshore wind can also be done much more competitively. And in my country, we actually operate a daily spot market where the price is set in a daily auction that follows the lowest bid, and where that sort of sets the platform for the daily price. And that, I mean, other countries do it differently, and clearly there's also a difference between when you add market entry and then you have a more mature market and a more mature price system. But I think that's also a learning we can go through collectively. And then the third dimension currently in the work program is to look at the intermittency question, the grid piece. Both large countries like India, clearly you have a very elaborate grid, and you can maybe work towards an intermittency where you can work your whole energy system off renewables, because you have offshore wind on both coasts, you have solar, you have hydro. Actually, as you build this out, you will probably discover that you need less and less of backup of fossil-based power as you progress. That has been our national learning, and we will phase out our last coal power station within the next 5 years. Actually, currently we have around 60 to 70% of our energy from renewables already in our grid. But that question of how to balance your load, the intermittency, the collaboration across borders is really also one that we can take to the next scale. And then the ambition for the long term is not 380 or maybe 500 gigawatt by 2030, but there's clearly a potential of 2,000, 2,500 gigawatt by mid-century as part of the global push on climate neutrality. And I think for India, when you become also a first mover in your region, you will see that as you take the industry to scale in India, you also have other parts of the world where the knowledge and technology and the insight in how to do this will benefit Indian industry in terms of becoming globally competitive. So I think there's a huge perspective for that collaboration, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Some really practical elements and next steps there, I think, to focus on. I want to turn now to Dr. Jan Dvatin, who's the CEO of Service India at Siemens Gamesa. So obviously from a Siemens Gamesa perspective, being a manufacturer, I think it'd be really interesting to just delve into a bit more detail around what does a large global manufacturer look for in an emerging market when it comes to that kind of policy infrastructure? What are you looking for in terms of volume, and what would be your priorities when it comes to investing?
Thanks for the question. Just to put things in perspective, we have around 50% market share of all offshore wind energy, and we were one of the first, potentially even the first, of installing offshore wind energy in Denmark. So it's a nice track record that we have, and it's an honor to be here today. I'm personally living in India, unfortunately only dealing with onshore energy, and I wish I could add some offshore wind energy to the portfolio. What we look at is our offshore wind turbines are in hot demand. Practically, the demand exceeds our capacity to produce. So what we look for is volume to make additional investments in capacity worthwhile. So we look for commitments for viable projects and volume with an attached certain timeline. I think those are important. Tariff, timeline, volume.
And when you say volume, what do you specifically mean by that? Because I think it's a word we use a lot in the industry, but can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, so we have to consider India as a market entry, even though there's a lot of onshore wind energy already, but offshore is really a different industry. So for a market entry, when we look at the first project, the onshore wind turbines are 3 megawatt turbines, but offshore wind turbines are 15 megawatt turbines. Now, a project becomes interesting if you have around 50 turbines. So any project below 750 megawatt would not be interesting as a first project. But if we continue, we are obviously not the only OEM. There are multiple OEMs interested in projects. So if you would only release one project, then it's very difficult for an OEM to actually consider a market entry. So you need to have multiple projects in order to say this is an interesting market to look at. So what would be multiple projects? I think it's important to think in batches. So batches of around 5 gigawatt would work. But even one batch is not sufficient to justify localization, for example, because we want India to benefit from it as well. So you need to have batches of 5 gigawatts and then committed batches over timelines, working towards a 10, 20-year plan. But there should not be any uncertainty in the plan, neither should there be any stop risk, because you don't want stranded assets in this industry, because it's a very capital-intensive industry.
Thank you for that explanation. I think that would apply to kind of any emerging market out there that's looking at this criteria, right? But I think for India, obviously, that opportunity is before it in terms of setting out that future direction of travel and that volume that you speak about.
Exactly, because India has the opportunity to capture this volume. It's both blessed with resources and with economic growth and a large group of consumers. So it is energy hungry. If you look at the G20, then India is in the top 5 energy hungry countries. 4 of them have offshore wind energy already. Only India does not. So it's basically to turn wind into winning. That's what we need to do. Or to turn talking into turbines. And then we're going to be there.
I like those catchphrases. So wind into winning and talking to turbines. And with that, we'll go on to Mr. Parag Sharma, who's the founder and CEO at O2 Power. Have you got a microphone? You have. So from a developer perspective, then coming
if I
to you.
just intervene.
Yes, please do, yeah.
Does this 37 gigawatt excite you? It was to Siemens.
It does,
yeah.
yes. I took notes of it. And,
Okay,
and the timeline as well, 2030. The only thing I noted down was, does that mean 37 gigawatts producing wind energy by 2030 or
No.
seabed allocation by 2030?
37 gigawatt means from now this year, 2023 onwards, till 2030, you will have a series of bids, as you call batches, which will cumulatively add to 37 gigawatts, which probably if I go for this year of 5 gigawatts, which I'm going to do, and then you will have this kind of trajectory which will go up to 37 gigawatts by 2030, and then beyond that. So right now, this is the plan that we have already issued, and hope this will excite not only you, but other manufacturers to contribute to the Indian offshores.
There was however, one item that concerned me.
Yeah.
And that was the 4 rupees you mentioned.
Sorry?
The 4 rupees per kilowatt hour. That was the part that concerned me.
Oh, yeah. So the intention is to reach that figure, but now we will buy that at 4 rupees, but we'll also bridge with some kind of government money to match the expectations of the developer.
Excellent. Yeah, fantastic.
Good. We like a lively discussion and debate on this panel, so more interruptions are very welcome. But Mr. Sharma, coming over to you, from your perspective as a developer, I mean, what do you think are the most pressing concerns for you now, looking at the Indian market and also the global market?
No, thanks, Rebecca. I think for all the developers in India, one key requirement or one key request always from the MNRE is policy certainty. So if we see in India, the onshore wind, we grew up to 5.5 gigawatt in FY17. And then it came down to hardly 1,500 megawatt of annual capacity addition. A lot happened in between. The 3 gigawatt of bids got terminated because of the change in land policy of Gujarat. We suffered a lot in Andhra because of the PPA termination. We are seeing what is happening in Rajasthan. Because of the GIB issue, we are not able to install any wind turbine there. So we always feel, and stakes here in offshore wind are much higher. And as Dr. Jain also mentioned, it doesn't require just initial bids. It required a long-term policy certainty of how much megawatt of bids are going to come up so that the manufacturers can design a turbine which will really work efficiently in India. So having said that, but looking at the enthusiasm of NIWE, MNRE, we see a lot has been done. A significant amount of work has been done. And we see that, yes, though we are missing the targets which are mentioned in the strategy paper of 37 gigawatt, but we hope that soon we will be doing a catching up and these bits will come. Thanks.
Thank you. I think policy certainty and that uninterrupted pipeline and line of sight is always going to be key for developers in whatever emerging market. But I think also from an Indian perspective, given the kind of longer history in wind, it's even more important. Yes, Thomas, do you want to intervene?
But just to reassure my Indian friends, that the Danish experience of 30 years of wind farms is that our last auction, the developers paid us to get the bid. We had an income of around $350 million for the bid of a 1 gigawatt site.
Yes, thanks for that that contribution, Thomas. I think it's certainly true that when you look at leasing revenues as well, there's an emerging picture there around that trajectory. But I want to come now to Mr. Mohit Bhargava, who's the CEO of NTPC Renewable Energy Limited. Welcome. I think you're the representative here of conventional energy generators and conventional energy companies. And I think that gives you a unique perspective to offer to the panel here. So from your perspective, it would be really interesting to know what you think the most compelling reasons are for you to move into offshore wind. And how do you see that also in an Indian context with other kind of state utilities too? So your perspectives on that would be very welcome.
I didn't know Mr. Jagdale invited me as a representative of a conventional generator.
That's just my take on it. But I think you're here for more than just that. But obviously your unique perspective is welcome.
So first and foremost, thank you, Mr. Jagdale, because he's quite persuasive, so I couldn't say no. Even despite the fact that I actually told him I have no clue about offshore wind. But yes, we are very keen to do offshore wind, and it's actually quite a learning experience being here up till now. Thanks to Dr. Katyal for that very, very engaging presentation of what all has been done. But I think a lot of points have already been discussed early in the morning during the inaugural session when Secretary Power and Secretary MNRE, Mr. Alok Kumar and Mr. Bhalla said that offshore wind is one of the key pillars in how we achieve the net zero. And despite the fact that NTPC is the largest electricity supplier in the country today, our footprint on the renewable side is still small. But what we definitely need to do, and that is the plan and target which we have set for ourselves, is that in the next 10 years, we actually want to have a renewable capacity which is almost as large as our conventional capacity. Yes, it does give us a unique advantage in terms of knowing the entire customer base in the country. We supply power to practically all the states in the country, so we know how to sell power. But I totally agree with one of my friends here who said 4 rupees. Earlier I heard 7 rupees. These are numbers which I think are very, very ambitious and right now more of a wish list. Because compared to what the prices are, and for example, as we heard from North Sea, and the wind speeds and the potential there, the resource endowment in terms of offshore wind in India is much lower as compared to what it is in the North Sea. So in our sense, the numbers would be significantly higher, and all power to Mr. Jagdale and team at MNRE to ensure that we're able to get the right amount of funding to ensure that we're able to deliver at 4 rupees, because the gap would be significant as we see. Having said that, I have a business proposition for my friend from Siemens here. So you said 5 gigawatts? What exactly you want to do? Tell me. I mean, we could get you a larger number. You have to commit. I mean, I'm using this platform, so apologies to Mr. Jagdale, that we could actually have a deal to do 3, 4, 5 gigawatts per annum. We'll be keen on the timeline, and apologies again to my friend Parag sitting there, because he's also quite keen to rope, someone like you. And so we could actually do a much larger capacity. All the timeline of 2030 appears very, very ambitious. As we understand, and I think Ambassador said 7 years is the permitting period. So 7 years we'll only get the permits, Dinesh.
That's 7 years worst case, I think.
Yeah, he said 7 years for permitting, and then we need, I think, another 3 years at least for actually doing the erection and operationalizing. So we are looking at a 10-year, which is why I agree totally with what Mr. Alok Kumar said, that we need to look at offshore wind as a mission mode. We need to look at least 2040 in terms of what offshore wind we can achieve in. I'm not sure offshore wind will actually replace storage. It will supplement storage, which is why what we have done that more and more we're trying to provide RE, RTC power, that's with storage. Offshore wind will come in and maybe help us during the peak times. But what it means for not only NTPC but India as a whole is that offshore wind has a unique place in how we are growing. And I think one of the topics, one of the points which was in the subject I read in the mail was that how it helps in net zero. Yes, it'll help in net zero, definitely. What's important is that we get our act together, which is why our request to MNRE, and these are just 2 cents of what I can say, is that please ensure that you provide a level playing field. Right now, the big documents, and this is at the cost of repetition, right now the big documents which MNRE has prepared and which was put forth for the stakeholder consultation said that it's actually quite skewed towards people who already did an offshore. We haven't. Please let us participate on an equal level. That will ensure that you get the right amount of bid. So trust the Indian companies more than non-Indian. And no offense to anyone sitting here. And secondly, like I said to my friend from Siemens and also from other things, because the biggest issue we think is not only getting the seabed acreage done, it's also in terms of financing, it's also in terms of getting the equipment. My friend Paulo, I was just sitting with him, he's there in the audience. He told me that EU has decided to do 120 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 in North Sea alone. What we understand is all the equipment manufacturers are actually not looking at India at all. So unless until we create a market which is attractive, which provides adequate incentives, we don't see how the equipment manufacturers and the EPC contractors will look at us. So that's the other bit which is very important, because we can get the finances, we can probably bid in the auctions, but we need to ensure that people who have the resources, who have the capabilities, who have the skill set, and I think our friend Suman Sinha said in the morning, we need to get these people, the specialists, the EPC people. That's the other part which is very important. So I'll probably stop here. Thank you.
No, thank you for that contribution. I think it comes back to what Jan was saying also about having that, really setting out India's stall as a global offshore wind power, putting in place a framework that will attract that investment. Because I think you're right, at the moment, India is part of a global market, and there are other markets out there that investors can look to from an international perspective.
I think you put it better than me. The only point is we need to be more attractive than, for example, EU or US. We need to probably beat what Mr. Biden is trying to do, try to give better incentives than what they are giving. Otherwise, everyone is rushing towards US. So we need to see how we can get those people here if we're looking at a 10 or 15 years target.
There's actually, for anyone in the audience who's interested, GWEC actually did some analysis on this in our most recent report, looking at supply chain capability across the world, across key components. And we did find that by 2026, there will, in pretty much every region of the world, apart from China, be a shortfall in equipment. But for me, that signals a huge opportunity for a country like India, which does have a strong manufacturing heritage and capability, to really seize that opportunity. So just thought I'd offer that perspective up as well. Just also want to make one clarification about the point made by Thomas on permitting. I think what Thomas was saying was that so far in the journey of offshore wind, 7 years has been the timetable for that. But Indian offshore wind comes at a point where we need to speed up all these processes, think of different things, do things differently. And I think India as an innovator is very well placed to also be able to disrupt the market in some of those activities too. Yes.
And just to add, Rebecca, I referenced the latest tender we had that actually gave an income to the Danish government, but that is ready for construction. I mean, they won the tender last year and the construction has started now, and that gigawatt will be ready by 2026. So we've actually gone through the permitting before we arrived at that stage where the tender was awarded.
Yes, thanks for that clarification, because as you remember, Denmark operates a one-stop shop, one-stage model, so permits are already awarded before the tender round happens. I want to turn now to Mr. Alp Gunsever, who is Head of Secretariat at the Centre of Excellence for Offshore Wind and Renewable Energy. And I want to ask you about your perspective on kind of next steps for India. And also, we've talked about this a little bit already on the panel, but where do you think that India can excel in the offshore wind value chain?
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the opportunity here. As our secretariat, it's a collaboration between Denmark and India, and I think it's fair to say today that I'm joining from the ministry, the Indian side. So yeah, I will try to complement. There has been a lot of discussions which covered a lot of the topics. But I want to start with the discussion of the 37 gigawatts, the pipeline, and the auction trajectory with 4 to 5 gigawatts of offshore wind being tendered out each year. I think India has, I can say India has already excelled in ambitions and the political support for kickstarting offshore wind. Of course, for the future, when we look at the different opportunities for the future, we need to start to build when we come to cost, when we are discussing the cost of offshore wind, when we are discussing the opportunities that India has to maybe export its knowledge, its manufacturing power. We need to start looking into building an ecosystem. And how it starts is actually by some of the studies we have been carrying out, not with only us, with I'm talking about Danish Energy Agency, but also with other donors such as World Bank, and to reduce the risk and to communicate this to the foreign investors maybe for the initial projects. But then it's, I think India, with the young population and with the need for energy that has been covered, with the potential of developing a market, there is the electricity market being more developed in the future, and the costs may be coming to a more reasonable level in the market for offshore wind as well. Then there is a potential to also use this as a hub for the countries, for the region around. Giving examples from Denmark, Mr. Ambassador has already covered the port of Esbjerg, but we have been discussing the ports here in India. So again, when it started in Esbjerg, it also developed as a hub for the whole European market. And there is potential over here as well with the port developments. When we talk about the manufacturing capabilities, when we have the ecosystem maybe in the future tenders with 4 gigawatts, 5 gigawatts coming every year for the next 10 years, there is a potential to use this as a manufacturing hub for the neighboring countries. Also coming to Dr. Kachal's presentation, in Denmark, again giving an example from a test site where the turbine certifications are being made in Østerild. There's a potential also to do it in Danskode here. So India has, I think, many tools and a lot of potential to excel in the offshore arena. But again, the first steps are very important, and that's where we are trying to work with the ministry agencies. And it's not only MNRE and its agencies, but it's also the collaboration with the other agencies. So I can say there's real support and ambition to build this offshore market here.
Thank you for that. I think we're almost out of time, but I think Jan started something earlier with his turning targets into turbines and wind for winning catchphrases. So I'd like to ask the panel individually now, in as succinct a way as possible, in as few words as possible, what you see as the priority next step for offshore wind and for offshore wind in India. We'll start with Thomas, and we'll work our way through to Mr. Jagdali.
The mission that Secretary Kumar mentioned this morning, I think, is the way forward. And by having a mission-driven approach, the rest will follow.
Mm-hmm. So mission.
Yeah, I think the priority is to get the VGF funding approved from the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you. Any more catchphrases for us, Jan?
No, I'm a positive person, but I would like to build on your comments. I could have been here also as a negative person. I looked it up. In our ranking, India is number 23 with regards to market attractiveness for offshore. 23. That's not good. So how to get to number 1? I think that's the most important part. And that is to turn the ambition of India into reality. And I think what is very important is that first project to be announced with a decent tariff. Very important, decent tariff for the first project. And then we are able to move up that ladder quickly.
I would say it's important to take further risk reduction mitigation measures, maybe for the offtake. That will be pretty crucial in making offshore viable.
I think pretty much all is covered. So if you can make it slightly more dramatic, I can only request Mr. Jagdale to actually give us an offer. I mean, make us an offer we can't refuse. Make offshore wind as attractive in India to sell and to develop as you can.
Okay, an offer on the table there. Do you want to get here? I think it's on.
Yeah. Dr. Katyal, anything? Yeah, so two things I will tell. One, bring the tender this year. Get this 4 to 5 gigawatt of capacities this year. And then think beyond 2030 to 2040. So I think we will work on both approaches, including what the panel has suggested. But the first taste of success is the first tender that the government will issue in 2023.
Thank you for leaving it on that note of opportunity. I think that is the right note to leave it on. There's huge opportunities in front of India, especially for its role in the global offshore wind picture. So I want to thank our panel here. Please give them a round of applause for their contributions. I'm sorry we didn't get around to audience questions, but I'm sure the panelists would love to have a bilateral conversation with you around any of the points that they've raised here today. So with that, thank you. I'll hand back over.
Madam Moderator, I think this was a very interesting panel. We've already got some of the top priorities in hand, and I'm sure that the Government of India, NIWE, and other stakeholders in the room will take note of it, and we'll see more progress in the coming days. Now, may I request Ms. Rebecca Williams, Global Head of Offshore Wind GWEC, to kindly present memento to Mr. Dinesh Dayanand Jagdale, Joint Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India. May I also request Ms. Rebecca Williams to kindly present a token of gratitude to His Excellency Ambassador Mr. Thomas Anker Christensen. May I request Ms. Rebecca Williams to kindly present the token of gratitude to Mr. Parag Sharma. May I request Ms. Rebecca Williams to kindly present the token of gratitude to Dr. Rajesh Katyal, Director General, Additional Charge, National Institute of Wind Energy, Government of India. May I request Ms. Williams to kindly present token of gratitude to Dr. Jan William Javatin. Rebecca, may I request you to kindly present token of gratitude to Mr. Mohit Bhargava. May I also request you to kindly present token of gratitude to Mr. Elp Ganzever. Now, may I request Mr. Dinesh Dayanand Jagdale, Joint Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, to kindly present token of gratitude to Ms. Moderator. Thank you. May I request all our esteemed guests, esteemed panelists to kindly get together for a group photograph, please. Thank you, everyone. We'll proceed to our next item on the agenda. Now, may I invite Mr. Paulo Frankel, Head of Renewable Energy Division, International Energy Agency. Mr. Frankel will be making a presentation on unlocking global offshore wind potential, opportunities and challenges. Do we have, yes. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and it's a great honor to be invited to share with you some views of the International Energy Agency on unlocking the global offshore potential and to highlight maybe some opportunities and challenges, some of which were already been mentioned in the first session, which was very interesting. But let me start with a few numbers. We speak about potential. How big is this potential? The potential of wind offshore is actually huge. Back in 2019, the IEA released a special report assessing the global long theoretical potential of offshore, which is really huge. It's more than 400,000 terawatt-hours in the whole world, which is more than 17 times the whole electricity demand. I repeat, more than 17 times. And in some regions of the world, it's multiple times the current electricity demand. Look, for instance, at Europe, but also at India. Now, all these are rather abstract numbers. It's not new that the potential of renewables is vastly higher than total electricity demand. But what is the reality in terms of how renewables and wind offshore are progressing? And allow me to put wind offshore in a larger context for a moment, which is something which has not been mentioned earlier today, and which is that in the next few years, renewables will become the largest source of electricity worldwide, surpassing coal. First of all, as you can see in this graph, which is coming from our renewable market report published in December 22, wind and solar are both growing exponentially. So solar will actually become the first source of capacity, but in terms of generation, wind is very important, and wind offshore, of course, even more, because of the largest number of full load hours. And by 2025, actually, so only in 2 years from now, I repeat, renewables will become the largest source of electricity, and by 2027, we expect wind offshore to become 6% of total renewable electricity worldwide. Now, allow me to show some more figures about this growth of wind offshore. And here you can see something that was already mentioned before. Wind offshore was born in Europe, starting from Denmark, and then expanding in more recent years to China, which has become the #1. And in the next years, we forecast to expand in a number of other countries. And it was said before, it's all G20 countries. And India, of course, is still missing in 2027, but it will come soon after. Now, one other aspect that I would like to show from this graph is the spike of 2021, which is due to the expiration of some incentives in China. This is actually not very good. What we really need is what some of the speakers before said, which is a predictable, smooth growth projection with stable policies and predictable demand. This is what is needed. Boom and bust cycles are actually absolutely not good for industry to develop a sustainable business. Now, to summarize the numbers for the G20 aspect, G20 has been leading the wind offshore growth and is expected to continue to lead this growth in the coming years. And to put some numbers in perspective, in 21-22, I've taken the mix exactly because of this spike of 21, which is not representative. We were at around 15, 17 gigawatt per year. In our forecast, in the what we call an accelerated case, if countries deploy some policies, for instance, reducing permitting times, we can be around 40 gigawatts. And then, however, in order to be on track with our net zero scenarios by 2030, we should rapidly ramp up to more than 80 gigawatts in the world by 2030. Now, this is a huge opportunity. It is also a huge challenge because there are challenges that need to be faced and that should not be underestimated and which require some policy attentions. Now, the first, and it has not been mentioned earlier this morning, we are in a moment, in an economic and geopolitical context in which the commodity prices have been raised and the prices of turbines have gone up. It is vitally important that for a sustainable business, that this is reflected in the auction tariffs. It has been mentioned before. Someone said, Mr. Jagdale, please give us a decent tariff. I have to support this. It is a moment where the industry needs to make huge investments and a huge acceleration. This can only be done if the business makes a sustainable profit. Don't expect now to, the important thing is that the auctions find the right compromise between affordable prices for consumers, but at the same time, now, right now, it's vital to give a sustainable business for the companies. Reducing permitting times has been mentioned several times, but other things that have been also mentioned is proper planning and investment in grids. And here we have different allocation of cost models. Even in Europe, across countries, it's different. In some countries, the developers have to pay for their own grid connections. In some others, these costs are socialized. And obviously, I repeat, we are in a moment where we are requesting the industry to do a massive acceleration. What you need to give is certainty, predictability, and have a decent business return. And then my last 2 points, which has also been mentioned, make sure that the whole supply chain, including infrastructure and ports, is actually present, and there is adequate attention of policymakers. Now, wind offshore was born in a small country, Denmark. If you are interested in how things are going in the next years, please look also at another small country, which is Ireland, which has enormously ambitious targets and which is facing exactly all these challenges right now, and they have a very interesting approach to it. Now, I would like to conclude on the opportunity side. First of all, there is unprecedented policy momentum in several parts of the world. You mentioned several times the India seabed leasing project until 2030, but I would come back to the North Sea Summit that saw several head of states very recently, and Dr. Birol, our executive director, had the honor to address them, which these countries have put forward a target of 120 gigawatt by 2030, which is hugely ambitious, but which is also a moment of an enormous step change in the momentum in the global offshore, and which I believe will have global impact in the years to come. And of course, I should mention China's evolution, and US also big ramp up in wind offshore as well. The other two things that were not mentioned, the offshore industry has synergies, and this is very visible in the North Sea, with the oil and gas offshore experience. of an entire industry which is sitting on massive amount of capital that could be redirected to offshore. And the last point is, of course, the possibility to couple this with offshore production of hydrogen. So overall, I would like to conclude by saying that the G20 group as a whole has an immense opportunity and responsibility in accelerating wind offshore. India is coming as a new enter, and this will make a big impact. And I would like to conclude on a positive note by saying that wind offshore has to play and will play a major role in the renewable mix in power, in sustainable future power system. Thank you very much for your attention.
May I request Mr. Dinesh Dayanand Jagdale, Joint Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, to kindly present a token of gratitude to Mr. Paulo Frankel. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Paulo. I think that was a very comprehensive presentation from the IEA, not just discussing that what is the current situation, but also telling us what are the opportunities ahead of us. Now, as our colleagues are preparing the stage here, may I mention to our colleagues in the room that we are now going to talk about one of the most important elements that is going to drive offshore wind in the country, but not just in India, across the globe. And we have a very esteemed panelists lined up for this very important session. We have Mr. Chintan Shah, ex-director technical IRIDA, who will be moderating the session. We have Dr. Pradeep Kumar Das, scientist D, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India. Ms. Vaishali Nigam Sinha, co-founder and chairperson of sustainability at Renew. Mr. Mark Potter, Power CEO and industry leader, Aeon. Ms. Mani Khurana, senior energy specialist, World Bank Group. Mr. Pradeep Tharkan, director, Energy Transition ADB, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Das, Chairman and Managing Director, IRIDA, Mr. Ajay Jain, Senior Advisor, Choreo Generation. May I request our esteemed panelists to kindly join us on the dais. Mr. Chintan Shah, Dr. Prabir Das, Ms. Vaishali Nigam Sinha, Mr. Mark Potter, Ms. Mani Khurana, Mr. Pradeep Tharkan, Mr. Pradeep Kumar Das, Mr. Ajay Jain, Thank you. Now I would hand over the floor to our moderator, Mr. Chintan Shah. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a tough session for me to moderate. When Dinesh spoke about 37 gigawatt of offshore to be done in India, I don't know how to moderate it. It's an aggressive number by any chance, but let us try to go through it. Bit of an opening remarks from my side. Across the world today, about 65 gigawatt of offshore projects have been functioning. It's operational. And lion's share is coming from one particular country, which is China, growing in a big way. The cost range, something like $2.6 million a megawatt to about $4 million a megawatt. That's the range that we're talking about. Interestingly, India fortunately has an extraordinary wind industry, manufacturing industry, and almost every OEM is present in India. Again, I can tell you one thing, that Indian manufacturing cost for wind is by far the cheapest. It's cheaper than China also. So that actually gives a cue that when you get into offshore wind energy production in India, India actually might be able to compete in terms of pricing because you have the right engineering skill sets and the supply chain available for on-land wind power projects. But similar mechanisms can be created for offshore also. So that's something which you have it in India right now. However, there are various investment models in offshore. One is putting up the entire project on your own, or you have unbundled the entire project into an infra project and a power project, as you have it in solar park concept. This is another business investment model we're talking about. Financing is going to be a big activity, there's no doubt about it. If you just take 37 gigawatt of projects, you're talking about something like $100 billion of investment. And I'm not even counting the ecosystem, which will require to be also created. It will be another about $20, $25 billion. So you're talking about something like $125 billion of total investment to be done if you want the entire ecosystem back to back for offshore in India. That means we'll have to work a lot on actually learnings from the infra sector itself. India has a very, very, very aggressive infrastructure right now. You have the ports, you have the highways, the bridges, the long-term projects, 30 years, 35 years, hydro projects and all. I think a great deal of learning can be brought out from the infra projects into offshore projects, because offshore projects are also going to be long-term in nature. And rather, borrow things from there. For example, you have a very robust InvIT market in India for infra project. Maybe the InvIT model can also be brought into offshore wind energy projects in India. When the projects get stabilized, you create a bond market. And another thing which is going to be very important from the financing perspective is what sort of end-to-end solution we're talking about. Are you going to produce electricity and sell electricity? Or there's going to be a value addition in terms of producing hydrogen. If that is the case, maybe you don't require hedging at all, because hydrogen is priced in dollar terms. So these are various mechanisms that can be looked into. Apart from this, in the initial phase, it's very important that we go all together. We heard in the first session about Secretary Power talking about to create a very robust offshore wind mission. When we say mission, offshore wind mission, it has to be all-encompassing. I mean to say, you have to look at all tenets of it. We might have to look, apart from the VGF, which is there going to be the first project, it's also important that, maybe do you require something like a PLI scheme to kickstart manufacturing in India for offshore? Maybe we'll look at possibility of getting CTF money with MDBs, so to have that the initial infra cost gets reduced. You might also look at the GST interface itself, because GST is also playing a major role in costing. Should the GST be priced at 1% for offshore wind energy? These are things which will ultimately help to bring down the costs and better the economics. So if there's a wind mission going to be there, I would suggest that it also looks into this. We talked about, the earlier sessions talked about supply chain. Very interesting to learn from solar itself. Solar, the supply chain is actually common. You can pick up module manufacturing, you can buy cell from anybody. You have a cell manufacturer, you can buy ingots from anybody, or wafers from anybody. They have essentially standardized the supply chain. I think it's also important to bring down economics, to bring economics in wind. We need to standardize supply chain to some extent. Not to a great, but some extent. So it will essentially reduce the cost. And yes, the ecosystem is very important. Sometimes what we do is we create projects, but we forget the ecosystem. So ecosystem has to be looked into, including capacity building of vendor creations, and maybe role of philanthropy societies to essentially partner with the government to do so. And India is a very price-sensitive market. So any sort of innovation towards financing, towards taxation is going to be a welcome to act as a catalyst for the investments to happen. Lastly, before I open up the questions to my fellow panelists, I would like to say one thing. There's an advantage on a long-term basis for offshore wind energy. We've been talking about capacity utilization factor, about 46 to 48% projected in India. That is by the current technology. Maybe by 2029-30, the technologies might have improved further. You may talk about 50% or 51% utilization factor. If you couple that with solar on mainland, you are talking about 75% PLF. You are practically a thermal generating unit, make you more predictable. Now that is the economics of the electricity that would be priced somewhere in 2030. So when the ministry is talking about allowing open access, I think it would make a great deal at that level when you have a 75% utilization factor essentially you can supply electricity at every places and essentially replace the storage which is needed today to go at such a high plant load factor. I think I'll open up, this is a opening remarks from my side. I would start in the same way as it's been written over here. Mr. Dash, we heard about a lot from the ministry in the earlier session. But what do you think as a ministry are the challenges in the offtake instruments that we've been talking about? We're talking about two offtake instruments. So one is tariff with distribution company at a fixed rate, along coupled with a VGF. And the other is an open access. You allow open access to anybody and to sell electricity to anybody. What do you think there are going to be challenges in that? And do you think there is a need for maybe for an offshore wind energy obligation, like the RPO, you have the wind RPO, wind purchase obligation. Do you think there's a case for offshore purchase obligation? And lastly, several states in India we've been seeing is bringing out the hydrogen policy document. Do you think at least states like Gujarat and Tamil Nadu should come out with a port-based industry documents so that people can come and invest at port level and near the ports, so that the electricity which is produced from offshore can be consumed by those industries which are coming at the port? So over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, and I'm feeling very happy and honored to be a part of this panel. And in fact, at the same time, I feel I have a very difficult situation here from ministry side, what exactly to add. A lot of things have been spoken about, and in fact, Dr. Katial's presentation, then in the inaugural session, the opening remarks from our secretary, Power Secretary, as well as from Jagdare sir, everything is covered from the ministry side, but I'll try my best to supplement. And particularly coming to the question, I feel what we are trying to do here is, we know we are trying, taking a lot of time to kickstart the sector. We all accept that offshore challenges are many, and to overcome these challenges, a lot of things has to be done from the ministry side. Being the public institution, we have the responsibility to take the higher share of project risk. But at the same time, India is a huge market, demand is there, so we feel a lot of effort has to be put in place for kickstarting the sector. But once the sector started, the acceleration should be very fast so that we can meet the target. So there, in fact, we are trying to adopt all the business models which are proven worldwide on offshore based on the risk sharing. So these initial set of projects, we agree it needs a financial support as well as the support from regulatory and policy side, as well as from the clearance side from the government, and we will try our best to address all those concerns. And at the same time, we would like our industry to get prepared to take up the open access market, wherein the higher share of risk will be shifted to them. And coming to the question of how to ensure this power offtake, for the initial set of projects, we have in fact contacted all the governments, state governments, to show their interest to purchase this power from offshore wind energy projects. But obviously, when the tariff is high, why the state who has nothing to gain out of this industry will be ready to take that power? So the natural preference is government of Gujarat and government of Tamil Nadu, who are going to be benefited out of this industry in terms of employment and other cascading effects of the industry. So they agreed, both these governments agreed to purchase around 2 gigawatt of power at a tariff of 4 rupees. So that means 4 gigawatt of capacity of take is already there, but the condition is 4 rupees, the tariff. So Government of India is now planning to bridge that gap for the initial projects, and we have some positive response from Minister of Finance. And then the second power of take, which is the open access market, we feel the open access policy, what is being released from the Minister of Power, has a lot of positive response. In fact, our C&I customers, a lot of industries, they are looking at that market, and we have a lot of good policies in place in terms of ISTS waiver, in terms of additional surcharge waiver, and making this process seamless. So that market is growing. In fact, in India, that market is growing. So we believe offshore has a good case for that, to take that share from the market. And Honorable Minister has already approved ISTS waiver for offshore wind energy along with the additional surcharge waiver till 2032. And we are also working on other fiscal incentives, let it be the import duty concessions. And I had an informal discussion with Minister of Finance. They are very positive, in fact. So I'm planning to finalize the proposal soon on this respect. So I feel both the markets can go together, but a lot of preparedness is required from the industry side to tap the open access market.
So I think the perseverance by the ministry is very important, and I'm quite sure the ministry would pursue its effort. Vaishali, ReNew started its journey from wind energy. ReNew started the journey from wind energy, and it's very logical for ReNew to get into offshore also. ReNew is now, I think, one of probably the largest operating RE company of India. Now, having said that, what is important is when we started off solar in India, we unfortunately could not create the right ecosystem that wind had. And while pushing for offshore, I think we should not be missing that bus. We have to create the entire ecosystem in terms of the right vendors, either the new vendors or the existing one needs to develop, enhance their skills itself to higher levels, and also bring in new vendors. And I think this is a role needs to be played by both government as well as private sector, and maybe some philanthropy societies also. We also talked about nowadays about inclusion, inclusive growth, and even women empowerment. What would be your views, or what do you think entities like ReNew or such entities can play a role in creating this momentum parallel, which is very important. It's going to be in the background, but I think the most important one, unless the ecosystem is there, really you can't proceed ahead on a longer term basis. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shah, and I want to just congratulate everybody, obviously G20, GWEC, the private sector, industry, and everybody who's come together to organize this discussion, this event, because I think it's events like this which brings experienced people together to come up with solutions and build the momentum which is really required. So just to go back, ReNew started when there was no ecosystem for wind, actually. So I guess companies like ours have experienced how to operate and create when no ecosystem exists, which is perhaps a higher bar. So how to address an ecosystem then becomes easier because at least you have an ecosystem now. So I think that is really the good news. So I think, see, the first thing is that I feel, if I could step back, very often we put ourselves in silos as industry. So this is wind, this is solar, this is infra. And honestly, I think we have a lot to learn, as was mentioned in the presentation before, that we can all learn from oil and gas. I'm sure a lot of, we can learn from infra. We see a lot of the work going on in Mumbai, the city. I'm here after 3 years. All the work which is going on around, in the coastal, with the coastal construction. I think there's a lot of learnings. We must get together and cross-collaborate. Like, even in our companies, we often talk about, we all work very effectively in silos and learn from each other, but the best learnings come from what we can learn from other sectors, other industries, and share learnings. And also, courtesy G20, I think there's a lot to learn from other countries as well, and what we can teach others in terms of a low-cost model, what we can learn from others in terms of efficiencies. So I think it's great to see that we are doing that, and we must build the momentum, and we are living in a world where all of this is possible. Secondly, I would like to say that the larger ecosystem, and it's not only a localized ecosystem, but it's also investors, the ESG investors, which are asking us to build on the supply chain and ensure we and the onus is really on us, on companies like us, companies which are larger, can afford to invest in the supply chain. We must. And it's not only with respect to, green initiatives, it's not only with respect to safety or but it's also around capacity building. So it's time for us, I think, to do our bit, and we must use our leverage from experience and do that. I think we're all incentivized because now we're also getting rewarded. If you look at various ratings, etc., you get scores for doing work and working on like your scope 3 heavily. including. So I think these are good developments. I do believe that we can expect a little bit more. I see we have a colleague on the panel from multilateral organizations to step it up and help new industries with more innovation around finance. And I think the world is talking about it. The time has come for us to really step back and ensure that there is more innovation for the renewable sector and the renewable energy space. I think there's not been as much as there could be to really put this growth in on a trajectory. And when financing is there, when demand is there, costs will automatically come down, which is one of the biggest impediments. So these are some of the important issues to consider. I would say on the capacity building side and inclusivity side, you know, we can use a lot of the CSR funds as well for capacity building, but we are not allowed to do so. Like for capacity building is not a part of the CSR mandate. So perhaps some policy tweaks will help us reskill, you know, workers who are available to work in these areas, especially women. We are doing a project in, you know, in certain parts of our country where we are reskilling women who have been engaged in activities like salt pan, etc., which are not the best ways to be employed, and reskilling them to become solar technicians. You know, whether it is CSR or not, it's a good activity and we'll do it. But there is scope for us to broaden what NGOs can also do with respect to capacity building, how we can incentivize, how corporates can fund capacity building, period, because there is a lot of need. And I think private sector can set targets to make sure they achieve their goals. So we have a target of 30% women in our organization at all levels. And that really gets you to think and ask the question that if women can go to space, if women can become pilots, why can't they be engineers on a site? It seems pretty easy. And it's just that we all need to come together and support, and perhaps not coming back to you know, multilateral organizations, perhaps when they ask us to execute projects in a certain way with certain requirements, we make sure we do that, right? So these are some of the ways in which we can perhaps get different stakeholders to prioritize and ensure that we don't have 16% of women in the workforce, but 60%. So with that goal, hopefully we can do better.
Very well said. And I think the point that you raised about the CSR funding for utilizing for skill development, I think it's a very important thing, because skill development is needed and it's a continuous need. You need to be constantly upgraded to be there. It's like it's need. So I think that's a good point. Mark, you have a very interesting surname. So I'm quite sure you'll throw some magic coming from your side. E.ON is a very important developer in the offshore wind sector. And we have a target of 37 gigawatt in the coming years. And I'm quite sure E.ON is studying the Indian market very detailed to take certain positions and all. We are talking about right now 2 offtake instruments. One is to have a power purchase agreement with a distribution company, state-owned distribution company. Another is the open access transactions, which in India, the law allows you to sell it to any industry you would like to. It's a private power purchase agreement, and the transmission charges is going to be waived off by the government. That means you don't have to pay the transmission charges. It's been socialized with the entire electricity sector. The only advantage is a CNI segment or a commercial industrial segment might have a different type of rating in terms of payment cycles and all compared to a distribution company. What do you think, anything more needs to be done in terms of an offtake instrument apart from this? What are your views so that, you know, we are able to kickstart offshore in a big way in India and showcase it to the world that this India has arrived, as we've done for solar. Now we see almost every global equity firm is investing into Indian solar projects. We would like offshore to go to that level. Now you from Europe, how do you see this and what do you think more can be done about it? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chantin, and thank you for inviting me to this esteemed panel today. I wish I could wave a magic wand and make everything happen, but I think there's probably a little bit more work to do before we actually get there. So, very happy to represent the insurance industry on this panel today. I believe that we're an important part of the supply chain as well in terms of making projects happen. So from an Aon perspective, we've been involved in about 30 gigawatts worth of offshore wind projects. And as part of that, we manage over $500 million worth of premium every year. And in total, we've managed over 350 offshore wind claims. So that means that it gives us a lot of experience to potentially help the sector and help the sector move forward when it comes to the offshore wind world. So it's good to be able to represent that here today. When I'm looking at early stages of development and how we actually move forward with that, I think it's really important to collaborate for different parts of the sector to actually get together and to actually understand and learn from each other as we move projects forward. When I look at bankability of projects, I also think as well about insurability of projects. And a key role for the insurance sector is to help de-risk those investments for developers coming into the sector, and also as well to help to optimize costs as well, to make sure that the economic cases behind them can be delivered effectively. So we believe that we can provide a good role to help that in terms of the data and understanding and learning we've got there, but the whole sector needs to do that and to come together. I was looking at the Wind Institute charts earlier and looking at the graphs and maps and the data that's starting to come together on the wind energy opportunity in India. And that type of understanding really helps to understand the risks that's associated with it, and then helps to look at how you potentially de-risk some of those investments too. So I believe there's a lot of collaboration that's required across there. In addition as well, really clearly the supply chain needs to move forward. A strong, robust supply chain will support the success of future projects, help to de-risk them as well. We talked a little bit about standardization and homogenization as well. And the more that you get shovel-ready projects, that you have a proven track record, a proven supply chain, a proven banking model, a proven insurance model as well, with capacity behind it, that will help to drive the sector forward and help make it successful.
Thanks a lot. I think we'll come to you again. I got a couple of more questions, but after we listen to the money bags, which is both multilaterals, the EDB and the World Bank together. So I have a common question to both of you, to both Mani as well as to Pradeep Tharakan. MBDs definitely have a major role to play. There's no doubt about it. We talked about the numbers in a brief, $100 billion. And if you take a debt equity ratio of 70-30, I would say it should be 75-25, but let's make it conservative, 70-30. We're talking about $70 billion of debt capital. And apart from that, huge amount of debt capital required to create the infrastructure. There's something called upstream and a downstream. Also is needed. So we're talking about huge. And this being very long-term projects, we'll be essentially looking at longer amortization schedule so that you get the right economies in place. Pricing is something which can always be looked into. And yes, any sort of a contribution from CTF with a blended financing, it definitely helps the initial period so that you create the right traction of volumes getting built up in India. And it's always believed that when you bring in volumes, standardization, the costing comes down, the economics is much better. That's what, it's a typical S-shaped curve which is needed in any sector. This is also true for offshore. What do you think, what role bank, both World Bank as ADB, is likely to play in this particular space, and what sort of expectations then a country like India can have in terms of the debt capital coming from both lenders? It also requires maybe some equity capital also. You also have equity arms. So that will also be needed, because I think it's a massive investment we're talking about. And essentially, more importantly for offshore is there would be port-based green hydrogen facilities coming up. That is all, it has to be looked together. So over to you, both of you. I think you both are experts on this.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me for this panel discussion. Honored to be here and share my thoughts. So, very interesting questions, and I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability. It's a big question, so let's just start from the basic. As you rightly said, in any new technology, the S-curve is there. And whenever a country starts entering it, you need to figure out what needs to be done. So for World Bank, what we joined hands with are, so we have a private arm called IFC. So World Bank and IFC put together an offshore wind development program. Now, the main thing, and it was said so clearly in the first panel, is about having clarity. What does the government want to do? How many gigawatts will be coming in the pipeline? And when will they be coming? And so we started working actually with 10 countries, including India, where that was the first requirement, a roadmap for development. So now focusing more on India. In India, when we started off, the main question, I think in other countries we still face the thing about, why offshore wind? Can we look at other technologies? I think in India, the ministry was convinced, everyone was convinced that offshore wind has to happen. But every time we got stuck with the same question, why should, can we really invest so much in offshore wind right now when the prices are so high, and solar and onshore wind can give you much less tariff? And this goes to the affordability debate. So, and it's a very just debate. So our entire interaction with MNRE has been on how do you reduce that tariff? How do you get that cost down? And it begins with de-risking. Everything. And I'll give you an example of the solar park, the Rewa Solar Park. That's where World Bank, IFC worked with Government of India to put in the different, it was just risk mitigation measures in the bidding document during the process so that the tariff was as low as it came for Rewa Solar Park. Where if you really looked at the financing we did, it was only shared infrastructure. The developers knew when they do the investments, by the time they come in, the shared infrastructure should be taken care of. The transmission would be there, and therefore there will be no delay. And we are trying to follow a very similar model when it comes to offshore wind. We are working with MNRE to work on the shared infrastructure, in this case, the grid infrastructure and the port infrastructure, so that they are financed at concessional rates, the tariff goes down, that's shared, and obviously, along with that, the bidding documents, so that each and every risk which is there, you mitigate it, the risk perception decreases, the tariff goes down. If that can be done, I think that would be really important. Just one other element that is another thing which is being discussed and can come up is the guarantee, because that instrument can also become really interesting. So we have World Bank, IFC, and MIGA. So when it comes to guarantee, if you're not assured about a certain thing, you get a guarantee instrument, which can also play a role in getting down the tariff.
Thank you very much. And if I can just pick up from where Mani led. Firstly, thanks to the government and GWAC for inviting ADB to this event. And it's particularly nice to see Ms. Sinha from Renew Power and Mr. Pradeep Das from IRIDA here. So ADB was an early investor in Renew Power. And ADB has provided several lines of credit to IRIDA back in the day. And we look forward to working with IRIDA on offshore wind and other emerging technologies as they become more commercial. Just to pick up on what Mani said, really where it comes to an MDB, it's not about the quantum of debt. I can say that right away. We don't have 70 billion. And we will never get to that stage. I think what we bring is we're the first movers. We have traditionally supported first-of-a-kind commercial projects in most countries, be it solar, be it floating solar, and now onshore wind, and hopefully now offshore wind. We bring in a lot of project finance expertise. So the bulk of the offshore wind projects now globally, especially in Europe, are being financed under a project finance regime, and we are able to offer long tenor loans, typically 15. We can even go up to 18, maybe even 20 under exceptional circumstances. And we are end-to-end solutions providers. As Mani said, MDBs have the ability to bring together public funding, stapled private funding, if that's, and that can even be made part of a bidding document under certain circumstances. We can do transaction advisory. We bring in concessional funding. All of that together really helps to move the first-of-a-kind project in most countries. And because of our international sort of presence and our credit rating and our reputation, which has been built over many decades, this really gives the market a lot of comfort. And this leads to lower prices, intense competition, which brings down prices. Just to give you an example of a recent project that has relevance for what we're talking here, it is onshore wind, it's not offshore, but just earlier this year, ADB approved financing for a 600 megawatt wind project in southern Laos. This is a cross-border project that is exporting power to Vietnam. So you've got all the challenges of a cross-border project, power purchase agreement, country risk. So ADB arranged the entire 700 million, this is a $1 billion project, so 700 million of debt, providing our own resources. We syndicated loans, and we also had parallel loans. We brought in concessional resources, climate finance, and we also brought in about 10 million in grant to support curtailment risk. So this is an example of the kind of support that MDBs, and particularly ADB, can bring to the table. In specific terms, in addition to the long tenor, the other is the foreign exchange. We can lend in both hard currency and in local currency. And again, speaking of how to bring down the cost, so when we can make direct payments to foreign suppliers, which then helps with GST savings, FTP benefits, import tax exemptions. And so that's another sort of advantage that MDBs bring to the table. We can potentially also help to create a market for the carbon credits or the offsets. We have carbon funds that can buy credits on behalf of people that have entrusted resources with us. We can help to develop methodologies, certification, and so on. And also a couple of other things that we could potentially think about is the foreign exchange hedging cost. And I'm not a TD or a foreign exchange specialist, but there is some thinking now on how can we help to subsidize the hedging cost. I mean, this is going to be substantive. Going back to your point, given the amount of financing that's needed and the bulk of it coming in the form of foreign exchange, how can we bring down the cost? So there have been some proposals on perhaps having the government step in and philanthropies and potentially MDBs step in to set up subsidy mechanisms where you could tranche the foreign exchange hedging costs, and then it is the long tail, which is the extremely volatile portion of that, which could potentially be subsidized. So just thinking about some of those approaches, sort of the additional value add that MDBs can bring to the first set of projects. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Das, first of all, congratulations for the outstanding results IRIDA had put up for 31st March. But having said that, I think there's a lot which is resting on institutions like IRIDA, PFC, REC, because they understand renewables primarily. And offshore wind energy is going to be a totally new science. And definitely there's a leadership role for the central institutions to play when the market is getting unlocked. As Mani also pointed out, shared infra concept in solar essentially triggered lowering of costs because the risk perception was much lower. Even today, if you see any project that is getting bidded in India, if it's for a solar park, the rates are different because the development risk is much lesser. Otherwise, most of the projects in solar also gets delayed because land is not in place, infra is not in place, and then you have this overhang of supply chain. The three risks that people carry and the rising interest rates. So anything which is readily available in terms of infra, it makes a great sense for at least for the people to come in. Do you think IRIDA would like to play a role or should be playing a role in this shared infra for offshore? In offshore, it's very simple because there are only 2 offshore locations in India, unlike solar. So we know it very well. It's either Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. So two major shared infra has to come up, at least for the initial phases. And I think without the shared infra in place and the right bid document in place, that what happened in Rewa and got repeated in Shahjahanpur, Nimash and all. We also saw in Pavagada, Kurnool, everywhere, where the solar park is there, projects did come up in time and they were quite competitive in nature. You think IREDA can play a major role because IREDA has already been working on solar park shared infra. So there's basic understanding in place, the systems are in place, and there is one counter guarantee mechanism also IREDA created as a part of the World Bank line of credit, which I'm aware of. Similar things can be also created for offshore to kickstart this initial phase 1 of 10 gigawatt. Over to you, Mr. Das.
Thank you, Mr. Chintan. First of all, congratulations to you also for wonderful result of IREDA because you are part of that for almost 10 months. And you have RE experience of 3 decades. I'm having RE experience of 3 years. And of course, I'm in energy sector since more than 2 decades. And of course, what wonderful results we have done in IREDA, that is not wonderful result, it's just wonders. And we understand the sector pretty well, much better than anybody, any organization in India, as far as financing is concerned. And in order to address the concerns, because the size of the projects, the quantum of funding will be quite high, almost 4 times of your traditional wind projects per megawatt if you look at. And if you see today, IREDA's loan book, we have almost 20% towards wind. And as per the IREDA's trend, in every first quarter of the year, we do the financing hardly 5 to 7% of the year what we do. But this year already in a month we have done 5%. And essentially out of that 68% is towards wind. It is a coincidence. Now we are talking to offshore wind. And you have rightly said, it is not only wind financing, it will be infra and wind financing. In order to address that, I'm happy to share with you all, RBI has already granted us the infra status. So IREDA has well planned these activities and very soon we'll be submitting to the MNRE and Government of India to modifying our object clause so that we can capture infra funding also, which is extremely critical for this kind of thing. And our existing developers in India or global, whoever is there, they are going to play a key role in this. And they are our existing business partners. We have a fair amount of matured relationship with them. And the developmental banks and multilateral agencies, they are with IREDA since 1990. And we have a matured relationship with them also. Be it solar infra project, where we are handholding World Bank, and so also for several line of credits with ADB. And I'm sure they also have experienced the change in IREDA in last 3 years. Change not only in financial terms, qualitative aspect of governance for which any MDIs are concerned, and any multilateral agencies are concerned, any investor is concerned, any developer is concerned. And we have attempted to reduce the turnaround time like anything and ensure the cheapest cost of funding to them, which is the 2 crucial parameters for any developer in RE space. Why I say RE space? It is unconventional power. You have to have unconventional attitude to manage it while financing. You cannot afford to be traditional. It is constantly changing. It's technology centric. You cannot say what technology you had last week or last year, it will be withholding today, or you can have something better than that. We can compare simpler way to a mobile technology. Similar to that, in a layman's way if you compare. So, as a lender, we have to ensure this infra as well as the large size of funding, how we can cope up with that. And we all know that IREDA was having a very low base of equity net worth. In 3 years, we have doubled with the support of Government of India, form of equity as well as dividend exemption. We have plowed back the profit to the equity. And again, we have all lined up, along with DIPAM, to hit the market, most likely in Q2 for our IPO. And it will be IPO as well as OFS combined. So around 25% of the shares will be offloaded in the market. And the kind of role IREDA has played and support IREDA has extended, it has not been widely connected to the developers. Apart from wind, solar, and hydro, other emerging space, several new players have come to us in last 2 to 3 years. And they were surprised the way we have handled them. And I'm sure post-IPO will be well known in the sector for our competency, capability, and delivery. I'm taking the clue of when World Bank, Madam was saying that clarity. We believe in the 3C principle, that C stands for clarity, second is for conviction, third is for commitment. If you have these three things focused, developer, policymaker, lender, and rest of the stakeholders. When I'm saying that is consumer also, be it DISCOM, be it even ordinary citizen of the country. We all should know that this renewable energy development, yesterday I has emphasized on that, today again I'm touching. What we are doing, we are creating a space for livable for our next generation to come. It is a very noble action what we are doing. So through this G20 program, I request all that let us come and adopt this 3C principle in T20 mode. When I'm talking T20 means it's fast forward and entertaining mode. That is what in T20 we do. So when you are doing renewable energy development or offshore wind or any kind of thing, you have to have this kind of thing. And I'm sure we do not have any kind of hindrance. And our Indian brains is globally known pretty well for technological innovation and perseverance and commitment. And I'm sure and confident that in the time to come, we are going to deliver the same, what is expected from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Das. Ajay, I think you're the last panelist, and I have a very interesting question for you. When renewables started off in India, it was very small, couple of megawatts every year, where an OEM was the developer, was doing practically everything. When the market started growing in a bigger way, you started seeing the concept of a developer coming in. And now it's very common. You have a developer and an OEM are totally separate entities. We are also proposing something similar for offshore, because doing foundation on the riverbed, on the seabed is a very different science than putting up a turbine on the top. You require two specialized agencies. So I would go for further unbundling, apart from the shared infra that Mani talked about. Suppose if there is some sort of a standardization for foundations, deep sea foundations, where essentially, and it is standardization by the OEMs in terms of the type of turbine structure or the tower structure they would have, then you can have essentially lay down maybe 5,000 foundation in one go. Because that reduces your cost. The major cost is deep sea foundations and laying down of transmission lines, subsea cables to the mainland. Now suppose if such systems come up in the future in India, what do you think is 37 gigawatt a tall enough market to get into those structures, or you still require much bigger numbers to get into this?
Thanks, Chetan. Worth the wait, I hope the question is. So yeah, very quickly, choreo generation, Mr. Jagdale, now we are 30 gigs under development. As of last year, it was 20 gigs. The additional 10 has come up under development in APAC region. Just to give a very brief background, Macquarie Green Investment Group is our sponsor. It essentially acquired Green Investment Bank of UK in 2017, turned it around so much so, and done so well that the UK Treasury actually keeps asking us, why did you take away the crown jewel? But I think that's to the credit of the platform. Chintan, to your question, yes, it's keeping in mind two key reasons why Choreo was formed. One is very specialized knowledge, experience of developing offshore. It is not oil and gas. It is like oil and gas, but oil and gas has the advantage of, you can make money hand over fist depending on the cycles. In offshore wind, we can't. We are very, very, capped by the tariff, which, I mean, it's great that you're offering 4 rupees in Gujarat or Tamil Nadu, but, it doesn't stack up, is what we all know. The second part is the capital, and that's where the Macquarie Green Investment Group comes in. So I think both are key, elements of success for offshore wind, and I think we are one of the few which is backed by a financial investor, and of late also by my previous employer called Ontario Teachers, who's put in about $1 billion on a select project basis. Coming to your question, yes, obviously it is specialized. 37 gigs itself is a big number compared to what is onshore wind today. Is 43 gigs in India, and it's taken it a long time. In my view, I will shift the direction a bit on a positive note. First of all, congratulations, Mr. Jagdale and team and Nive, in coming up with a paper which we believe is almost there. The tender is almost there, but for a couple of things which I'm sure you're working on. Morning was great. You mentioned that in 4 to 6 weeks we'll get there. It's essentially a policy reversal as I see it from what it was last year in terms of evacuation infra. The other elements that can be addressed, which Dr. Das, you mentioned, I'm very happy to note that import duty and GST, if those could be waived, that will make it really work. In my view, we don't necessarily say, okay, VGF is it is required if you're talking about state discoms taking the power. But in the long run, offshore wind has to be on its own if it wants to sustain for the long term, which means it has to have a business case. Now, how do we have a business case? I believe there is one with the private off-takers. If you see, they are buying electricity at grid tariff, which is very high and is carbonized, is black energy. And green energy, if it is to replace that, offshore wind has to play a critical role. Chintan, you mentioned 75%, and I missed how you get to 75% CUF?
You turn about 50% at plant load factor at wind.
Yeah.
And you add 25% plant load factor from solar, make it hybrid.
Yeah. So that's really the answer. So if you can hybridize with onshore and not necessarily compete with onshore, then there's a clear path ahead. Further, I think the power market can be looked at in a different way than we have been looking at, in the past so many years, decades, which is to introduce, which Mr. Jagdale, I think you're already doing that in some form, wherein you're pooling the tariff for onshore wind. So if we can have a market for green energy in India, which is pooled of all the sources, that is onshore and offshore, then I think we are talking about a situation wherein I don't have to come and ask for a VGF or a subsidy here and there. Let the market absorb that tariff. And towards one more point, I think, Mani, you mentioned that World Bank is keen to look at shared infra. One of the key discussion, actually change, has been around the evacuation infra, and mostly from offshore to onshore. I'm assuming that you're writing the check for that, so that it's easier for Mr. Jagdale to announce that. Maybe you can respond, I don't know.
It won't be that easy. So it's in discussion. And I think MNRE will come out with its bidding document, which will make that also clear, the evacuation part.
Great.
Yeah.
And Chintan, to your question, yes, I mean, it's very early days, and where 37 gigs is, it's a very good number to start with, let's put it this way. And if we can assure the OEMs there is a regular pipeline, which was discussed in the morning, about 5 gigs every year, whether it's implementable, I think that's the key. If the message goes very strongly, Mr. Jagdale, that look, we are here meaning business, and these are the things which you have done, I think there's a great story out of India for offshore wind.
Thank you. We're running out of time, but I'll try to sum up the things over here. This is a couple of my views on this entire thing. Till 2030, there's going to be a massive need for energy in India. No doubt about it. Only PLI schemes are going to create a demand of 50 gigawatt of consumption. Only PLI schemes, all put together. Because that new manufacturings are coming up in India. And they also trigger their vendor manufacturing. Just green hydrogen itself is going to be a consumer load. It's also a consumer load. Electrolysis is a consumer load. It's something in the range of 150 gigawatt. Talking about 200 gigawatt of actually known things. Apart from that, there's massive expansion going across India on the industry side. They're upgrading themselves, everybody. At the same time, fair amount of industries in India are exporting. With the CBAM into picture, they have to go green. There's no other option for the ESG compliances. Otherwise, they can't export. They're not export competitive. Putting all these things together, what I personally feel is the moment you hit a 60% capacity utilization factor on any source of energy, we are in the market. There's no doubt about it. The question is, you have to cross 60% because you become like a base load. And base load is one thing that any country wants. A base load coming from green power, I think it's more than a welcome. I personally don't feel at all that price is going to be a challenge. The challenge is going to be the volume you can deliver, the execution challenges that you have to overcome, and the financing needs which are there. If they're put in place, I don't think selling of electricity or of taking electricity from offshore, maybe a little bit expensive, would be a challenge because the demand for energy is much more, much more than we can deliver. That's something that my personal view is, but yes, as the couple of panelists did discuss over here, I think MNR is listening over here, I think most important part, if we can do it, it is the first phase, if we can reduce the GST to 1%. Don't exempt GST, please, that's a disaster. 1% GST means you can get a refund. That's a key part to it. Exemption, you can't get a refund. It gets subsumed. So it has to be 1% or 0%, but have it some percentage. Today, you don't have it. So that's something that reduces your cost. Another thing which one of the panelists did talk about is if you can look into CSR activity. If CSR activities, renewables is defined under CSR. Maybe a derivative of renewable, which is skill development, capacity building, should also be included because that is what is needed. And the ministry is anyway doing it. And if some philanthropy societies and some corporates would like to use their CSR fund for capacity building for renewables, I think that should be encouraged. That is something, a good suggestion, should be taken up very positively. Money and ADBD talk about the shared infra. I think that is some needed because that takes a lot of time. Huge amount of time is needed to get the line of credits in place. Maybe they have to also talk to CTF. CTF itself takes its own sweet time, 2 to 3 years to get the money. So I think we should be well in advance to get the CTF money along with the shared line of credit. Both multilaterals need to play a role there. I think that is something that should be rolled out immediately because that will about take 3 or 4 years. And rest, I think insurance is something which is an angle that I never thought about, which is very important. I think when the bid documents are getting created, that should be looked into, the insurance part of it, because this is our very large projects and major development funds would be getting into them. And Mr. Dash has a question for the insurance.
So basically for these offshore wind energy projects, whether these insurance covers all kind of mishappenings, and specifically talking, let us say there is a satellite launch and something is happening to the offshore, whether your product covers that insurance.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, there's a full range of different types of insurances that you use to help de-risk projects. And that covers right from the transportation of equipment through to the construction, the installation, the ongoing operations. there's a full range out there. And I think when we're looking at new sectors, new industries, new countries for those developments, it's really critical to understand the supply chain, the different technology that's going to be used, the different contractors that are going to be used, and the experience of those contractors as well, to really understand how you can unlock that insurance capacity in the most cost-effective manner across all of those different types of products that then that the developers would buy.
And last but not the least, I think the government of India also has to look creating the offshore market as a major GDP multiplier. Everything cannot be ascertained in rupees per kilowatt hour, because when you create huge amount of manufacturing setup, ancillary industries coming up, employment generation, and also export potential, and more importantly, pushing Make in India across the world, because you know in wind energy, wind turbines are getting exported from India, so it's an accept. That means Indian products are accepted in most of the developed worlds. So same can be for offshore also. So I think we have a huge potential, just not as a domestic market, but also for export perspective. So I think it's much larger perspective than looking at narrowly at rupees per kilowatt hour or something like that. I think much more gets into it. So that's the end of this session. Thank you very much, and I hope that such events would be gathering information and way forward, because as we mark this journey till 2030 and towards zero emission targets. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we also have time for Q&A, or should we? Okay, so I think we still have some time to take few questions. Any hands? And can you also specify whom do you want to ask that question to? Okay, I see Rebecca there. And do I see more hands? Okay, Rebecca, over to you. Can somebody please pass on the mic? Okay, the gentleman over there.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
When you are saying that financing is done by various banks to these projects, so what are the credibilities you will be seeing for the developers? And second question, I think no technical person is there. When you are saying that your turbine is of 15 megawatt compared to 2 or 3 megawatt of the onshore wind, how you are going to distribute this 15 megawatt to different customers in that case?
This question is to whom?
First question was to the bank person, and the second question is a technical question for the MNRE.
So I think first question, the only person who can answer this question is Mr. Das, because they do direct financing. Multilaterals do indirect financing, and Dash can then respond second.
See, I do not find much difference here. As I told, the size is big and tenure is longer. See, it all depends your technical feasibility. Once that test you are through, then structuring the deal for a longer period will not be a problem. See, earlier, even this wind and solar we used to give for 10 years, 12 years. Recently, we have also modified. We are going for 18 years, 20 years of lending. 85% of the project life. So here, if it is that, so I know that for a very longer period, you will not be having a good competitive interest rate kind of thing. And even if you do the we get the support from these developmental banks, nobody will give you hedging for 30 years. Like in solar park, we have taken for 20 years. And I'll share my own experience. I cannot disclose the name of the agency. Despite of our convincing them that it's a true 8.5 fixed rate for 20 years, somehow they were trying to convince us, no, we'll go for a floating rate and kind of thing. Then we realized it is not appropriate that we unnecessarily waste our time in guiding them. And we always believe that you are living in an era of liberalization, privatization, and globalization. You can live your life as per your taste, choice, and preference. So you can go wherever, whatever you feel like. And even today, I still feel the product what we are having for solar park, that is a best product. So similarly, we can work out for this offshore wind sector also. And see, when we are devising a mechanism, it is not only IREDA or World Bank. Our main agency, MNRE, they are also with us. And when it is hardcore financing, then we are taking also confidence of Ministry of Finance. So all the policymakers and stakeholders with respect to this subject, all are taken into confidence. And I don't foresee any issue in that. Thank you.
Rebecca. Oh, Dr. Das, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think the second part of the question, the expectation was from MNRE, but I don't know, this is a very technology specific question. But as far as ministry is concerned, our tender doesn't specify the capacity of individual turbines. Normally we keep our tender document very technology agnostic, and the choice of turbine, it is purely for the developer based on the technicality of that technology and a bilateral deal with the developer. But what we are thinking to specify in this tender is to a minimum capacity for an area. We don't want our areas to be underutilized. So to that extent, probably we'll specify that each area must come up with a minimum capacity. That also will give one chance to revise after his feasibility study is done. So based on that, they are free to choose the technology and do their micrositing.
Thank you. Over to Rebecca, your question.
Hi, it's Rebecca again from GWEC. The panel so far has been really interesting, but it's taken rather a narrow view, I guess, of what we term as financing. We know that the ESG agenda is raising in importance, and I think this question is actually probably to Vaishali, because I know that Renew have some exciting and interesting projects in this area to really integrate other sustainable development goals into this piece. So I wondered about your perspectives on this broader ESG agenda as part of offshore wind financing.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca, for that question. And what I'd like to say is that environment, social governance is critical. For any business we do now, I don't think we can think of doing anything without keeping ESG at the heart of what we do. And definitely, as we enter the waters, I would say from an environment point of view, from I would say more safety point of view, etc., there are going to be a lot of areas where we need to prioritize, report, and ensure that we follow the higher standards. So no, absolutely, I think ESG has just become an inherent part of what we do and how we do. I can't imagine this being any different. And the good news is we get rewarded for prioritizing ESG. That's really been a driver. So yeah, we just have to continue doing our bit.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? I think we have one more.
I have one question here.
Please.
Ranjit Nair here. This is towards the financing part of it. Actually, we heard that the DISCOMs from the states would be the off-takers of the power. So also we are talking about how to reduce the cost, finance cost also. Now, why can't this be different? Instead of DISCOMs taking it, central authority takes over this as a part of like what SECI is doing today, and then distributing it to the states, which may reduce the cost because the credibility of DISCOMs of various states have different credibilities actually. So this is my question to the bankers as well as to the government.
Yeah, should I reply? The CMD REC was sitting here. I think now he's not available. MOP has taken a extremely effective and impactful reform last year through LPS and RDSS mechanism, just to address this perpetual problem of the distribution companies. Here, not only they are ensuring your old dues are getting cleared, at the same time, they are preventing that current dues are not getting over. So this will be enabling the improvement in financial health of the distribution companies. See, it is pertinent to note, post these reform measures, there has been a reduction of up to 3% of AT&C losses. 3% losses reduction is a quite impactful thing. And in the time to come, that is going to further improve. The major concern was, as because distribution companies' health is not improving and lenders were continuously giving, and RBI was also concerned that these lenders' exposure issues are emerging. So that is the reason this, it's a hard measure, but the result is very positive. We have already seen the result positive, and I am confident there will be a significant improvement in the distribution companies. And also, I think apart from that, time will come because we have some discom whose health is pretty good. Look at Gujarat. If one state can do, then why not others? So that we have probably not taken the effort of having a mentoring kind of thing. That best practice of the discom can be adopted and adapted. But through this reform mechanism of Ministry of Power, a lot of improvement are going to come. And coming back to the why this central agency will not do, see, if the concern is distribution companies issues, those are addressed. Even if hypothetically I am saying, even if the central agency does and the distribution company liquidity problem doesn't improve, what will happen? Then the problem will be shifted to central agency. So here we have to address the root cause of the problem rather than looking into only the side effect of it. So my view is that we are forcing quite a lot of improvement in distribution companies through this effective reform measures by the MOP, and also constant and regular interaction with the stakeholders by ministry, both Ministry of Power as well as Ministry of Renewable, at secretary level, at honorable minister level. So holistic approach towards developing the sector and addressing the concern at each stage and at each value chain and each entity level issues and stakeholder level issues. Those are addressed. So I'm thinking that that may not be a requirement for getting into a central agency bidding. That means you are to saying instead of SECI, we should have a wiki another one.
No, so the question is basically
let me just address it. Yes. Just to add to Mr. Das, what your concern is a payment security mechanism.
Yes.
Exactly, right? So that's a sacrosanct part of a shared infra document, which normally World Bank pushes. That's what is there in REVA. REVA, the PPA is not with SECI. It is MP government only. And they are never defaulted. Why? Because there's a PSM mechanism in place. Very powerful one. So almost every solar park infra projects has a PSM mechanism. So what we need to do is get a PSM in place so that the discoms pay in time. That's what, and that I agree with you. That has to be there.
No, so basically why I took this is because the time limit that we have for doing all this is not that much when we are looking at the targets. And without even taking a name of any discom specifically or state, some of it are the current ones, which are not the best in India. So we need to address this for sure.
Okay, I think we have one final question. Anjali?
Hello. Yeah, thanks, Martin. And thank you all the speakers for this insightful discussion. I'm Anjali Lathigra from Global Wind Energy Council. I have a question more in the direction of capacity building. And I think the fishermen community is one of the important stakeholders when we speak about capacity building. So I have this question to Ms. Vaishali and also Mr. Dash from MNRE, that what are the plans, to kind of involve this very important stakeholder into the offshore wind market development, because this adds very much into the socio-economical development for that community. And I think Ms. Vaishali shared one of the examples how ReNew is reskilling the women and making the solar technicians. So I mean, if there is another plan with, for ReNew, so if you could just share what is the development from government side and what is ReNew is thinking about it. So yeah, this is my question.
You have the mic, you want to go first?
So we are definitely definitely taking very seriously this stakeholder consultation, basically local stakeholder consultation, because we know this local community has a larger say on these projects, and this is basically a state government subject. But as a single window mechanism from NIWE, we would also like to expedite these clearances as well as engagement with these stakeholders through NIWE only. And to institutionalize that, in fact, Ministry has created 2 task forces, one with Government of Gujarat and one with Government of Tamil Nadu. In fact, regularly we are meeting them, and the response from the state government stakeholders, including the fishery, their industry department, their energy department, the maritime board, the coastal zone management authority, they all are part of those task forces. In fact, we have very positive meetings in the last 1.5 years. And we believe we can, very smoothly execute this, and we will be talking to them through the state government to expedite the process seamlessly.
If I'm
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think it's a very important question. You know, the community, the fishermen, women community is an important community. And definitely, like we are doing our project in Gujarat, Project Surya, it's not limited to the salt pan reskilling. The idea is to reskill women, because we focus on women reskilling in other areas. So, you know, we'd be very happy to work and engage. And I think it's important to know that we can't do this independently. Even in Project Surya, we are working with international organizations, the local NGO, a couple of private sector partners. So various stakeholders who have to come together. In this case, perhaps GWEC, other industry associations, the Skill Council, players like ours. We'll have to really come together to ensure we can leverage the local skills, because once a person knows how to go to work, they know how to go to work, which is very important. And then reskilling is not that much of a challenge. It's just an implementation exercise. So definitely we are very supportive of it. We want to do this pan-India in different parts of the country. So we're really looking forward to reskilling more women, getting more women on sites. And I think if we can get the fear of STEM and technology taken out of the minds of, I think, a lot of the women. I think if young girls in rural areas also see their women, their moms going and working as technicians, they can believe that it's possible for them to do that. So we use a little bit of that mindset building and change which is required. So even in Project Surya, we have women who are in their 40s who are being reskilled, and young girls who are in their 20s who are being reskilled because of this impact. So definitely we need various industry associations, etc., to come together. And thank you to the government for coming up with a lot of the schemes which really can actually be put to more use and implemented better. So I think the ecosystem is in place. It's about really going and getting it done on the ground. So yeah, we're looking forward to that. I hope that answered your question.
I'll add something to it. These developmental banks, they have been handholding IREDA also through line of credits for capacity building. And see, we are only touching one segment of capacity building, and definitely the CSR and women power. I'm happy that you're talking women power, and I came to know that you're having 30% of your employees here. We are in the public sector organization. Despite that, we are having 27%. And 11 out of 16.
I want to correct that we have a target of 30%.
We have actual factual position as on date. 27%, okay. 27%. And we are targeting to make it 50-50. And yesterday, I have narrated, and some of you might not have heard if you have come today. Out of 16 major divisions, 11 are headed by women. And capacity building is part of our integral culture. Every Saturday we have lecture series, alternate Saturday we have focus development training program. And in order to address these emerging issues, fast changing and dynamic kind of culture in this RE sector, we have hand-holded top consulting firm with us as our knowledge partner, that is BCG, Boston Consulting Group. They are with us since 4-5 months. And we are not leaving any kind of opportunity with us with respect to spending and effective utilization and capacity building. See, as a lender, we need to constantly upgrade and reskill and ourselves with respect to the sectoral changes and other things. Because we do the complete appraisal of the project, techno, commercial, and finance. So all the stakeholder, I fully agree, and all the stakeholder need to spend their resource and fair amount of time also on capacity building. Otherwise, it will not become that bringing to mission mode T20. Thank you.
Mani, you also want to add something?
Yeah, thank you. Just to add one point, and see, whenever there's a new technology in place, there will always be a major role to be played when it comes to awareness creation, especially when you come to, you know, a section of society which will be impacted, might be impacted. It is very essential at the outset to show them what is being planned and share experiences where these things have already happened, so that they understand that it's not something which is coming out of the blue. It's been a thought-through process, and this has happened in different parts of the world. I think so. Therefore, one thing that MNRE is planning to do is about sharing that experience, and through the state government, tell them that what is in store, what is going to be happening in the future. Because if that clear information is not provided, that is where apprehensions come in place and problems may happen. So that is at the outset when you start the project. During as soon as you're going in for the project, this capacity building that everyone's talking about is paramount importance. And I'm sure ADB is the same. All these multilaterals when we lend, financing is only a part of it. The rest goes into the ecosystem development, be it the training of the financiers, training of the safety safety issues, training on basic processes. Everything has to be taken care of and made sure that it's followed. So I think it's, you cannot let go of the enabling environment, because financing will only be a small aspect. The other things are also equally important.
Thank you. I think yesterday during this event on low-cost financing, somebody mentioned that offshore wind is about bringing together an orchestra. And I see that, how our panelists have been bit by bit weaving the dots together. And I understand that offshore wind capacity building is not just about those who are in the offshore wind industry or those who are outside the offshore wind industry, but it's equally about oil and gas industry. It's also about the onshore wind industry that has to graduate from onshore to offshore. So there's a big target in front of us, and I think Secretary MOP rightly mentioned that we perhaps need a mission on offshore wind. So thank you very much, and now there is a moment of expressing our gratitude to our esteemed speakers. May I request colleagues to kindly get the mementos with us. May I request Mr. Chintan Shah, ex-Director Technical IRIDA, to kindly present a token of gratitude to Ms. Vaishali Nigam Sinha, co-founder and chairperson of sustainability at Renew. May I request Mr. Chintan Shah to kindly present a memento to Dr. Prabir Kumar Das, Scientist D, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India. Mr. Shah, I also request you to kindly present the memento to Mr. Mark Potter, Power's CCO and industry leader at Aon. Mr. Shah may also kindly present token of gratitude to Ms. Mani Khurana, Senior Energy Specialist, World Bank Group. Can we also have, may I request Mr. Chintan Shah to kindly present token of gratitude to Mr. Pradeep Tharkan, Director, Energy Transition, ADB. And Chintan sir, now is the moment for you to present token of gratitude to CMD sir. Thank you, sir. May I also request you to kindly present token of gratitude to Mr. Ajay Jain, Senior Advisor, Choreo Generation India. May I now request Dr. Prabir Kumar Das, Scientist D, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, to kindly present a token of gratitude to our fantastic moderator, Mr. Chintan Shah. Thank you very much. Now may I request all our esteemed panelists to come together for a group photograph. Thank you once again. I know we have exceeded our time, but I think the kind of discussion and the kind of sessions that we are having today in this room and the mission that lies ahead of us calls for this kind of intense discussion. I'm very thankful to our esteemed speakers, to our esteemed guests who have made this discussion and the cause of this gathering really important and really meaningful for us. Now, may I request Mr. Dinesh Dayanand Jagdale, Joint Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Government of India, to kindly deliver his vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, for having this wonderful session on offshore wind. I think, as a vote of thanks, I should first of all thank you all for coming here and being a very participative discussions. Two very important panel discussions we had. I think I should thank Secretary, Ministry of Power, Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Chairperson GWAC, Mr. Suman Sinha, and obviously all the panelists who contributed with their immense experience and knowledge on the offshore sector. It was a wonderful display of teamwork by NIWE and GWAC in organizing the entire sessions, and all the GWAC members who have traveled for this session, especially because this was an important side event which we wanted to do, taking the subject of offshore, which is obviously a thing which is emerging, and technology to be followed on, a sector to be supported, and we all collectively will be a part of this stakeholder journey, of this journey to bring the offshore wind across the shores of India. While I was enjoying these sessions, even during the first session which I was a part of, and the second session which deliberated on aspects from financing to sustainability to ESG to CSR. And while this journey, what I believe is that this is an act of various actors to be presented. It's a film which has to have many, many heroes and heroines coming out of the sector. But I'm sure with the kind of experience, the kind of interest, I should thank my dear friend Paulo, who gave a very insightful experience from the International Agency Outlook and telling us what should be the priorities, what are the challenges, and how this sector is going to be in 2030 and beyond. Now, what these kinds of messages give, it gives you more strength. It gives you more motivation to really pursue the cause, pursue the path which we are taking. I would really appreciate that our performance in offshore sector improves, and as one of our industry colleagues was trying to mention, that there is substantial gap between how they perceive the Indian offshore and how they would like us to be. And therefore, this element of the pathway that we have formed is to be a collective one. Not the government, not you, not the think tanks, not the developers, not the manufacturers alone, not the financiers alone. It has to be a collective effort. It has to be a collective thought process going forward. And this is what the several of 8 speakers in each session brought today. So I should thank all of them. A lot of key learnings to take us with us, me and Dr. Prabir and Dr. Katyal. When we go back, we will dwell on each of these suggestions, suggestive way forward thought processes that are coming. But the one message which is strong and clear, offshore wind is going to emerge on the Indian shores very soon. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, sir. I think after intellectual retreat, now is the time for food retreat, and the lunch is very much arranged outside the hall. Please join us for lunch. Thank you.